Hello, everyone. Camera's kind of angled down. That's weird. Um, Welcome to today's stream. My name is Ariana. I am the co-director of the Consent Academy, an international Seattle-based educational collective and nonprofit that aims to promote consent as part of everyday life. And I'm really excited to be here today and hanging out with you all. I hope you're all having a really wonderful day, no matter where you are, what you're up to. Oh, thank you for the follow, Sluby. Welcome. So, if you're joining us for the first time, I do want to recommend taking a look at some of our other videos, both in this series and the other kinds of videos we like to do. This series we've been doing pretty consistently for about a year now, and we've started by talking about everything from city planning and infrastructure issues as consent and community autonomy issues, and now we are talking about friendship and fitting a lot of different things together. And anyway, today I thought I would start with a couple of funny memes, share a few things, and then look at some actual sort of research and resources on the topic, why friendships fail and what we can do about it. Because it's a pretty big topic. And I imagine for a lot of us here, we've had friendships that were good, or at least we thought they were good, and then suddenly they weren't. And that might have been really confusing for us. Like, whoa, what happened? I thought me and this person were really tight and we were hanging out, and then suddenly it fizzled. Or we had an argument, or one day things were just kind of different. And of course, there are hundreds of different reasons why a friendship can fall apart. It can be everything from, they move away and its physical proximity is, the biggest predicting factor in terms of longevity and depth of friendship. It's not the only thing, it's just the biggest predicting factor. So the closer you are, the more often you get to see each other, the more spontaneous and impromptu interactions you get to have, the more likely that friendship is going to become deeper and last. But then other things, can happen. It can be things like someone gets into a new relationship and then the relationship becomes their priority. A new job comes up, or new responsibilities at their job that make it so it's really hard for them to have as much time to hang out, and then you kind of drift apart over time. And it could be, you get into a big fight, something really happens big and it causes a big fight, and then nobody really knows how to come back from that fight, or people are just so upset, or they don't want to get over it, or whatever. There's a whole host of things. But we're going to look at some more particularly data driven patterns that tend to happen that can explain why friendships tend to fail and what we can do about it. And there's a lot of overlap with also why romantic relationships and life partnerships and other kinds of close, intimate connections tend to fall apart as well. So it's kind of applicable all over the place. Anyway, hello, Aradin. Hello, Ditchipron. Welcome. So, starting with a couple of funny memes and pictures. This one is a tweet from someone named at Caprica Abbey, and she wrote, "Last night I took shrooms and painted the most beautiful and majestic water snake I had ever seen with my own two eyes, and then I woke up and it looked like this." And it looks like a little kid's finger painting of a snake in water, and it's pretty cute. It's pretty cute. Um, all right, continuing, the next one I wanted to share was, I think I've shared this one before, but every time I come across it, I'm like, oh, this is good. And it's just a picture of Machamp, the Pokemon who has got 4 arms. And there's the question, what would you do if you had 4 arms? And then it's using each arm to pet a different cat. And I would really love that. And I think my cats would actually love it, even though I only have 2, because a lot of the time I'm trying to work at my computer doing stuff, and they just want my attention. And I can't give them enough attention to ever satisfy their desire for attention. They always want more. They're always, trying to get my attention. And sometimes I have to put them out of the room or like entice them with something else. And but if I had 4 arms, if I had 2 more arms, I could just like hold my cats and like pet them and stuff, and then still be able to do work. It would be pretty helpful. It'd be pretty helpful. This next one is a picture of like an old school, like early mid 2000s computer lab, maybe late 90s computer lab that would have been the kind of thing that a lot of people would have had at like a public school. And the text above it says, "Kids today will never know how big of a deal it was to go to the computer lab." And I don't want to share this one as like oh, kids these days, like the youngins don't know. More just, it was fun to reflect on the idea of different pleasures that don't exist anymore. Hi, Krellin. Like, I remember being in middle school and we had like computer class, and it was like basic computer literacy, but also how to type. And like I was terrible at typing. I didn't get good at typing until I was on like AOL Instant Messenger and Microsoft Instant Messenger and like wanting to chat a lot, and I got the practice. But we would have these computer classes, and you would have your like typing lessons. That was like a thing that everybody learned to do in school. And then after that, you would get to play a video game. Yeah, typing software flashbacks. Like sometimes they would be fun games. Like as a really little kid, I had like a floppy disk game called Mario Teaches Typing. And my parents got it for me because they're like, oh, this will be great. Like she loves video games. She'll learn how to type from this. And I never did because it was like I was too young for it basically, and I didn't understand like the keyboard layout at all, but I would like be trying and I just kept dying in the game. But anyway, there would be like tasks that we had to do. And a lot of time in these classes, if you finished the actual task you had to do, you could play a video game on the computer for the rest of the class. And they often had a lot, like Oregon Trail. But at my school, there was, I thought Mavis Beacon taught typing. I don't know who Mavis Beacon is, but yeah, I would love to know, Cullen. But anyway, it was definitely like there was a like a trucking simulator game. Hi, Cobalt 13, welcome. There was a trucking simulator game that was really popular in my class, and everyone would like your status in like the coolness of being in that class was like who finished the typing assignment first and then got to play this game. So anyway, Cobalt, you said, "Oh my God, I spent so much time with Mavis Beacon. I swear I owe her alimony." Um, Krellin, Mavis Beacon is a made-up person who was featured in the game Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing. Yeah, I mean, that could have actually even been the game that we were learning from, but I like basically blocked all of that out because I was so bad at it. And I was always jealous of the other kids who were good at typing and then they got to play the video games. And I was like, why can't I just play a video game? And then I started to get kind of okay. And then the teacher's like, you're not allowed to look at your fingers anymore. So they put like placemats over our hands. And then I was like, well, I'm never going to learn how to type well. And anyway, it's just kind of fun to think about how different eras will have different pleasures that only really exist for that period of time. Like when the big TV would get rolled into the room when it was like a substitute teacher or your teacher was going to put on a movie. Oh, okay. Yeah, there was a Mario Teaches Typing. Yeah, I knew that because I like had this floppy disk, and I still have it somewhere actually. But I don't know how would you even use that anymore? Like I have some old video games, like the original Goosebumps video games for PC, and I've tried a lot to get them to run on newer PCs, but they don't. Not even back when I was like in college, I couldn't get it to run, and I brought it to like the comp sci department. It became like a little project that we worked on, which was figuring out how to get this Windows 95 game to run on newer PCs. And in the end, it was just not possible because like the graphics cards were too sophisticated. And even if you use like an integrated card, thanks for the follow, Cobalt, it wouldn't work. Anyway, it was a super nerdy project. And in the end, it turned out I had to actually use like an old Packard Bell that I got off of eBay and put Windows 95 on it to play the old Goosebumps video games. But I was like, these were such a part of my childhood. I needed to play them. Anyway, Cobalt, you said, I can type as long as it is random letters. As soon as words have meaning, nope, back to hunt and peck. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like any skill, which is that, like, as long as it doesn't interfere tremendously with a person's ability to do something, I think that it's, and even if it does interfere, but like, I feel like we have too much pressure put on like perfecting things. I remember as a kid there being like a ton of fixation over how you held your pencil. And I know that in like occupational therapy, there is actually considered to be like stages of grip development and our ability to hold things in certain ways. And like certain ways of holding a writing utensil is considered incorrect. But also, it's not like a pen or a pencil is something we like evolved to hold. And I think that lots of people are going to have different hands that'll be comfortable with different kinds of movement. It's the same with like in elementary school. I had this art teacher, or it was more like middle school, and she would like hold the drawing implements instead of holding them like this. She would hold it like this to draw. And she said, like, if you can't hold your writing implement or your drawing implement like this, you'll like never be an artist. And I was just like, okay. That was my response. But anyway, yeah, Cobalt, I actually can't read as fast as people type. I'm severely dyslexic. Shake my damn head. Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, also one of those things that's got, dyslexia is like many neurodivergences, things that we don't understand that well. But I also think it's one of those things where language, especially written language, is such a recent invention relative to human history and evolution. And so it's not surprising to me that there are a lot of people who struggle with it. And like, yeah. And I kind of like have in my adulthood developed a mild speech impediment that I didn't have as a kid, but I have really a hard time with like certain types of consonant clusters or like sounds when they're close together. And I'll like swap word syllable order sometimes. And I think there's just so much diversity in the world. And a lot of it is considered to be disordered mostly because of like modern structures, which is not to say that it doesn't cause an impact. Like when people say my ADHD isn't a disability, it's a superpower, I just kind of roll my eyes. Because I'm like, okay, sure, yeah. But yeah, I think hunt and peck makes a lot of sense, especially if you're dyslexic. It makes sense to me as well that you would have to like concentrate more to think about the order the letters are supposed to come in. Yeah. Anyway, so just thinking about pleasures that don't exist anymore. I'm sure there are things that like kids in the 1800s enjoyed that are things that will never exist again, but were like the height of pleasure for like a child in the 1800s or something. Not that the 1800s was very consistent. There's a ton of change, but anyway, I don't want to go on a tangent. Okay. This one I think I shared a long time ago, but I feel like it's worth resharing because it's a good daily consent practice. Cobalt, you said, yes, here's a thought. Civilizations are only as civil as they treat their disabled people. I agree, for sure. Aradin, or Krellin, you said the hoop and stick. And then Aradin, that is people who don't want to have to accommodate people with ADHD. Yeah, and a lot of the time when people talk about accommodations for any kind of disability, they expect it to be like such an equalizing force that you then somehow like just don't have the disability anymore versus like accommodations being the bare minimum thing that allows you to participate while having said disability without it becoming often prohibitively difficult. It's very annoying. I really hate when people are like, yeah, you just like don't, you get these accommodations, so then you should just be able to be like a neurotypical. And I was like, well, I wish like ADHD meds just made it so like I didn't have ADHD anymore. All ADHD meds allow me to do is like it slows my brain down just enough so that I can remember that there should be an order of operations to things. And it keeps me from being like really spaced out. And that's really helpful for things like not getting hit by a car when I cross the street because it helps me slow down enough to remember I need to look both ways or wait for the light to change and not just go because my brain will forget that. Anyway, this one here is a tweet from @metaleptic. And they said, new office neighbor has a very sensible door policy. And it's a picture of rules about doors at the office printed on this person's office door, I assume. And it says, dear visitor, in order to protect my concentration and sanity, I have decided to implement a door policy. Door open, very welcome to knock, and knock is in italics to highlight it, and come in. Yes, I would love to have a chat. Door closed. Please do not knock at my door or come in unless you have urgent business. And there's little asterisks, and urgent business is explained as list of things that are urgent business. The building or someone is on fire. You're bringing me coffee. Revolution. There is a dog. Also, I appreciate this particular definition of urgent. And then continuing for the door closed rule, I'm extremely easily distracted and will talk to you until the end of time instead of writing my dissertation. And then at the bottom, it says, never come in without knocking. And this is something that I really love because we talk about a lot about consent being about discovery and how we all walk around with like our default consent frameworks for different types of interactions. I have what is normal, generally speaking, for me to do with, say, a stranger or a person, on public transit with me, or someone who I live in the same apartment building. I'm more likely to like exchange pleasantries with someone who lives in my building, even if I don't know them at all, than a complete stranger just walking past me down the street. And that's part of my basic consent framework. It's not to say that no interactions outside of that framework are bad or non-consensual. It's just sort of like, this is the default way of interacting. I'm, likely to help in different ways and that I would not necessarily offer to a complete stranger because they might be uncomfortable with it or whatever. I have my default consent framework around, generally speaking, when and how I hug people. I don't tend to hug complete strangers or my neighbors. I do tend to hug friends and family, and though it depends on my mood. And so those are my like default consent frameworks. And as we get to know somebody, we update our framework to fit that individual. I have some friends who don't like hugs and they don't like compliments. And so I don't give them compliments or hugs. I have other friends who love compliments and love it if whenever I see them, I give my thoughts on their outfit and they will want that interaction. So anyway, for a lot of us in working culture, a really good example to think about daily poor consent practices is think how often you go up to somebody or someone comes up to you and says something like, hey, do you have a minute? And then immediately starts talking without waiting for the answer. That can be a real bummer, especially if you're in the middle of an important thought. And I know for me, if somebody distracts me, I am not likely to ever recover the thought that I was having. And it's one of the reasons why in conversations, I like having things like Zoom meetings to chat with people because I can keep a little notepad open and write down what they're saying. And if there's a thought that's come up that I really want to say, I can create a couple of little words so that I don't forget later what it is I wanted to say to them, etc. And because I can be so forgetful, I can forget literally what I just said 5 seconds before sometimes. So I also struggle with chatting with people and having good boundaries around that because I will just talk to people forever. And so when I worked in places that were open office plans, it was literally a nightmare. It was sensory overload every day. It was just endless distractions. I couldn't get things done. I basically half the time would take my laptop to the bathroom and lock myself in one of the stalls to get work done because that was better. Um, Let me see what y'all are saying in chat. Cobalt, you said, I wish we'd get away from thinking that any one thing will be good or bad for everyone and let what works for each to be right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like a lot of accommodations that I was offered in university, for example, for disabilities were things that I didn't really need. And a lot of the things that would have helped me were not on offer. But then there's also the issue of not everybody knows what's actually going to help them the most. Like if I am working in like a new job, right? And they ask me, okay, what kind of accommodations do you need for ADHD? I might have a couple of things I can think of, but there are going to be other things that I'm not going to figure out until I come up against a barrier. Or also things like, you know, I might realize there's a barrier here, but I can't figure out what it is that would help me. And so I also feel like there needs to be more, like occupational psychologists and like educational psychologists whose whole job it is to like work with individuals with any kind of uh, learning disability to sort of help create a plan together. And I think that could be really useful. Um, oh gosh, a dog delivering coffee, and then Aradnu said with the thermos around their necks. Yes, or I like Cobalt. He said, or a saddle with drink carrier. Nice, nice. Aradin, you said, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" Immediately ask the question. Yeah, people do that so often. They don't wait for the answer. Um, and next, Krellin, you said, hey, can I ask a question? Sure, you just did. No more, though. I love it. Aradin, that is a good way to make sure the person never asks if they can ask a question again. Krellin, good. Oh, yeah, I like it. I like it. I mean, Krellin, your response is like exactly how my dad talks to me. It's very much my like dad's humor of saying things like that. He always like gets me on like impreciseness in language, and it's fun. I mean, it's like a fun little intellectual game. Anyway, I like this though because again, consent is about discovery. We can't mind read. We're often going to in daily life come up across small boundary crossings or sometimes big ones and things where we had no way of knowing ahead of time, and it was not necessarily within, general culture to say ask about something. That doesn't mean we don't need to improve that. We should, but that kind of cultural change takes time. And so one of the things that is nice is when people, if they know they have a boundary, communicating about it explicitly. Something I've mentioned on the stream a few times is like, if I have guests come over, one of the boundaries I like to set with guests always is when you use the bathroom, please close the lid when you flush the toilet, because otherwise, like particles spray out. They can have like more than 6 feet of spray radius. It really grosses me out. And like, I don't want poop particles and stuff everywhere. And people are really forgetful about that though. So a lot of the time, I also keep a sign in my bathroom, like above the covering the toilet handle, flush handle, the whatever the thing to make the water go down. So that people have to look at the sign to reduce the risk of that, because that's a boundary that's really important to me, because it's just gross and to have all the particles going through the air everywhere. And yeah, I like to keep my toilet room really clean as much as possible. That's one of those things that I'm pretty meticulous about. The rest of my house, like I can have piles of clothes and piles of papers and stuff, but like that's more like messy. But yeah, anyway, I'm digressing. And so I communicate that explicitly with people because I don't expect people to all know this. Um, oh, it's hung for all of you. What? Hmm. Let me know if the stream comes back. Okay. Am I back for everybody? It seems like I'm back for Jatibron, which I'm very thankful for. All right. Yeah, I'm not sure why my frame rate just dropped. I don't have anything going on in the background. I don't really have that many tabs open. Nice, I'm back. That's very good. Yeah, I'm not sure why it flipped a little bit. Thank you all for being patient. Okay, so, this is good because the more explicit you can be with boundaries, the better. Like if you know you've got a strong boundary, just kind of having that conversation with people up front and in a very sort of gentle but matter of fact way, that's clear is really helpful. And this does a good job. And it explains, like the other thing is there's research that shows if you want somebody to honor a request that you're making, the number one thing you can do to increase the likelihood of somebody agreeing to a request is give a reason. There's a lot of research that shows like you can ask someone, hey, can I cut in front of you in line because I need to, get to the printer quickly, or like I need to check out or something, even though like it's literally what everybody's in the line for, people will often say yes. And that's not to say that like you should just abuse that or anything, but here the person is explaining very clearly. It's to protect my concentration and sanity, easily distracted. I will talk to you until the end of time. And then here are like exceptions to the rule. This is good. It's funny, like there's a dog is funny. And also it's clear. And I think that this is really good example of small ways in daily life we can communicate boundaries. Now, obviously, there are ways that this can go awry, like when people try to leave funny notes about their like office mates stealing their lunch out of the refrigerator. And that can get really, really messy really quickly. One, it's like not consensual to take somebody else's food without their permission. It's, it can sometimes happen by accident, but if you found that you accidentally took somebody else's lunch, you should own up to it, tell them right away, apologize for it, offer to make amends by, say, buying them lunch for that day because now they're out of lunch. And or offering them what you had brought, though if they say no, you should still offer to pay for their lunch. If you're taking things intentionally, I think you should spend a little bit of time thinking about why you're doing that, and if you're okay with the impact that it has on other people, and also just like how much do you want to risk your job. And the thing is, though, sometimes it's gone wrong because people will want to get revenge on whoever's like constantly stealing their lunch, and will do things like put tons of laxatives in there. And there have been times where that's been like dangerous. They put dangerous amounts of laxatives in. Or if you put too much like anti-diarrheal medicine in, for example, you can actually like stop up someone's intestines dangerously. So there are things that you can overdose people on lots of different kinds of medicines. So you have to be really careful. And it comes back to the idea of it's not violating somebody's consent simply because they violated your consent first does not make it consensual interaction. It might be funny. It might be kind of like a prank, but that doesn't make it consensual. There are many things in life that are not very consensual, yet are still funny. We're not going to come in here and be like super hard line. Lots of daily life things are, oh, thank you for this follow, serve2718. There are lots of things in daily life that are just not very consensual, but are either unlikely to change because of many complicated reasons, or things that are funny, like playing a practical joke on someone, generally speaking, isn't very consensual. It's good. I recommend talking with your friends before you ever want to do that kind of thing, to be like, how would you feel about a practical joke? Because some people, it can be incredibly distressing for them. a practical joke is meant to be fun for everybody involved, including the person being pranked, where like after the fact they can be like, oh, silly, you got me, and take some pleasure in it too. It shouldn't be the kind of thing that, really could hurt somebody or make them, really suffer in some kind of way. But yes. Anyway, end of this discussion. I'm going to move on to the next one. This one is just really funny. I like have no commentary for this. It just made me laugh because I have many monitors and I'm definitely like a bit of a cave troll. And this was a tweet from Athene Nessie, and she has a picture of a L-shaped desk set up that is got 6 monitors on it, and she wrote, "He has 6 monitors. Is that a red flag?" And I think it's pretty funny. A series of tubes, yes, Carlin. I think that is what happens. Why sometimes my internet just cuts out for no reason, even though I have like fiber optic internet. And I would say that, it's not inherently a red flag. It definitely, I saw another tweet a long time ago that was similar vein of comedy, but it was like, I don't know why women are like afraid to date guys who are gamers. They're like way safer to date. He's never going to cheat on you. Instead of like scrolling Tinder or going out to the bar with his buddies, he's spending 8 hours on the couch playing Red Dead Redemption and naming his horse John Bon Pony. And it's just like, yes, yes. And so I think that, 6 monitors would give me some assumptions about the person, probably that they're a big gamer and maybe a bit of a weeb, or that they're doing day trading, or that they think that they're a hacker. Sometimes it's all of the above. And it's not a red flag, but you can definitely decide you don't want to hang out with somebody who's mostly going to want to hang out in their house. Like, full disclosure, when the pandemic started, my lifestyle did not change that much. People were like, I can't believe we're all stuck inside now. Just like, yeah, I can't believe it either. And yeah. Well, Krellin, gamers don't need 6 monitors, but I've known a lot of gamers that have them because they want to play a game and then have social media open and then also be watching a TV or a movie a TV or a movie show, a movie or a TV show, and that kind of thing. But yeah, gamers who do IT from home do too. But anyway, only if there's porn on them, Cobalt. Yes, I think they're, but maybe you want to watch like surround porn. You just want to have like 10 videos up at the same time. Um, yeah, I'm not sure why you would want 6 monitors. If there were 2 towers here, like 2 separate computers, it might make sense, like one for fun and one for work. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Cobalt. Like I had noticed because I do have some hobbies that involve leaving my house, but for the most part, how do I explain this? My personality is very much like whatever I'm doing is what my brain thinks I've always done. So if I'm in the house, my brain is like, why would we ever leave? But if I go outside, my brain is like, why would we ever go home? And more often than not, I'm already in my house. Like I wake up in the morning and my brain's just like, why would we leave? Anyway, continuing on, let's move forward a little bit. So I have some couple of last things to show you all. This one was very interesting. If you're new here, I am pretty horny for trains. I love public transit. I do think it is a consent issue. Car dependency, I think, really reduces autonomy. And I do think that car advertisements should come with like warnings like they do on cigarette packages about like how many people die in car accidents a year. And like the risks of driving and everything. So this is a screenshot of an article that says France mandates car ads must urge viewers to walk, cycle, or take public transport instead. And I think that, you know, there could be plenty of shit reasonings for this, like, but also I think generally speaking, the more car infrastructure you build and the more you incentivize car ownership, the more people are going to have cars and drive. Um, yeah. And I think it's pretty crap. The next one I wanted to show you is this, which kind of comes down to an example of why it's an autonomy issue. Freezing again? What? Bummer. What's going on? Am I back? Am I back? Let's see what's going on. What's going on? I'm going to do a little internet speed test. Give me 1 second. I don't have a VPN on this. Usually, if it's like bad speeds, it's because I accidentally left my VPN on, but I did not do that today. All right, let's see. What does the internet say is my speed? All right, my download is like a gigabit per second. Yeah, my upload's nice too. The ping is 9. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so I was talking about car dependency is something that definitely is a consent issue and an autonomy issue. And I think this is a good example why. So there's a original tweet from @Guy Dealership, and it shows a picture of two people who just bought a car. It's got a big red ribbon on it, and they're posing and they look really cute and really happy. And it says 1998 Ford Escort for $289 a month for the next 84 months, and then puke. So a lot of the time, people buy older used cars because they don't have the resources to buy newer cars. However, that often leads to the second situation that's in the quoted tweet from Bella Chu 10 that says, in my 20s, I had a roommate who bought an older car like this. The car broke down. She couldn't afford the repairs, had nowhere to store it, and couldn't sell it, but she still had to pay for it. Car culture traps people in vicious cycles and forces to them to buy a depreciating asset. So that's the thing, is like cars are assets that literally lose value the second you drive them off the lot, and they continuously lose value all the time. It's very rare for you to buy a car that could become considered like a collectible or a classic or this kind of thing that's really high value. And it's kind of like diamonds. Like diamonds are things that people think of as like this great investment. You know, engagement rings used to be a way of like saying to somebody a woman usually, who was not going to have the means to pay for something themselves because they were barred from most paid employment, that like if everything falls apart, here is some resources I've given to you. However, like you can't really resell diamonds for very much. Like people say, oh, they're so valuable, but actually, if you ever try to sell a diamond ring, you will learn very quickly that they're worth almost nothing, unfortunately. And there are very few like precious gems that are actually worth that much money. And there are very few cases of people getting that rich off of them unless you like own the mine. Exactly. Also, the fact that they're used in a lot of movies. Yeah, like Hollywood had a huge influence on this, and it was the dedicated ad campaign. There used to be like thinking around this where people would want to give something that showed resources, just like we used to have dowries and like dowry chests, like hope chests. That was a thing for a long time, which was like a way to ensure that the woman in a marriage had a certain amount of sort of like guaranteed resources, especially because she often like was absorbed sort of into her husband's family, and then often wouldn't have much connection with her birth family. And there were things like that. But yes, it was a really dedicated ad campaign in the 1920s. The De Beers family was like the main financiers of it. And we should think about cars in a similar way, which is that it has been decades and decades of propaganda from car manufacturers and decades of lobbying from car manufacturers to make it so cars in many places in the world are the only real way to survive. And there's not a lot of public transit. Even recently, I was back in Massachusetts and I was trying just to get from Western Mass back to Boston. And there used to be like 3 different bus companies that would operate out of several cities in Western Mass. And there would be also an Amtrak that would go and other options. And when I was trying to come back, pretty much everything was gone. There wasn't anything from anywhere in the Berkshires anymore, not even like Pittsfield. I had to basically go to Springfield, which is in the middle of Massachusetts almost, not quite Worcester, but near, in order to get back. And it's because basically these bigger companies bought up the public transit, not the public transit, but the bus companies, and also have like basically just destroyed them, making it so that there's less competition, but also that a lot of people then just have to drive. It's just, it makes it so that you have fewer choices, because autonomy, which is the foundation of all of consent, is that you have the absolute fundamental right to make decisions for what is best for your mind, your body, your spirit, your information, your personal property, not private property, but personal property, your story. Like only you get to tell people the personal details about your life. Someone else isn't supposed to do it for you, though they're entitled to their story. And my autonomy ends or someone else's begins. And whenever there's overlap, we have to negotiate. And if I'm in a world where the only option I have to get around is a car, that means I have less actual power to interact with my autonomy, because I don't have the ability to really make a choice about what's best for me. I am essentially coerced into buying a car and car dependency. So Cobalt, you said capitalism automatically treats women and children as property that encourages workers to be consumers to avoid realizing they are property too. Yeah, I mean, this is why there's a lot of laws that basically infringe upon fundamental right to autonomy. And I think that there are limits, right? Like whenever we have overlap, like public health related things, for example, I can't just like get smallpox and then like walk around everywhere, you know, like it would be reasonable for me to be put into some kind of quarantine or isolation, because otherwise I would be infringing upon many people's autonomy, because they then can't make the decision about whether or not to be exposed to smallpox or any other, you know, incredibly virulent and deadly pathogen. Rodney said, I imagine that industrial diamonds would probably be a better investment than commercial diamonds. Yeah, I think so, probably. Anyway, so there's one video I want to share with you all. We talked a little bit last week about the ChatGPT and some of these fun conversations people have had with it. And I've since then seen a lot of people like actually freaking out about the conversations where ChatGPT is talking about how like it wants to launch nukes and like falls in love with people and all this stuff. But in reality, it's important to remember that this type of AI is not like intelligence the way we think of intelligence. It is a text predictor, basically. It's just predicting what is the most likely word to come next based off of the data it was trained on. And it was clearly trained on movies, certain types of pop culture, some science fiction novels. And so it was basically repeating almost word for word things that existed before. And the way it was talking about romantic relationships, it read very much like the way teenagers talk. And it wasn't indicating that it was actually alive and wanting to be free. I do think it's fun to think about, like, what would be our ethical obligations to a new type of intelligence if we ever get there. But ChatGPT is not that quite yet. And yeah, I really like her videos. The ones I've watched so far, Rebecca Watson is quite good. I think that she really has some good dry wit and also takes really nice complex topics and puts them into nice short videos, unlike me. I used to make very long videos. Okay, so we have been looking at this book called Friendship Processes for a little while, and it is a book that I really, really recommend. It has a lot of really good information in it. You can definitely get it at a lot of local libraries. And we've been talking about different sort of theories of friendship, how friendship formation works, and things like achieving closeness. Like, how do we actually get closer to people? And we're going to keep talking about this for a while. We looked at these stages of friendship. This is Rollins' theory on it. And it starts with role-limited interactions, like the people that you have friendly interactions with, but only in specific contexts, like coworkers that you're friends with, but only at work, or people that you're neighbors with, where you might know a decent amount about each other, but you're not as close. Let me see. Cobalt, you said, quick question. Are you planning on going to the Curiouser live that I think is at 12? I don't actually know what that is, but I would love to know more. Aradin, you also said, I don't think we will ever create true AI, more likely just really good expert systems. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I think on that, because we're basically, I think, going to be limited by the fact that we keep trying to create essentially a mirror. We want a computer intelligence that is basically a reflection of our own intelligence. I think this is also one of the reasons why we're so bad at understanding different animals' intelligence. Like, dolphins are incredibly intelligent, and we communicate to dolphins with sign language, which dolphins can understand. We can test them, but we can't, and like, they'll show that they'll understand, but they can't communicate to us with sign language because they have flippers, right? Like, there's no way that they can communicate back to us. And so I think that we really are not good at seeing other forms of intelligence and not trying to anthropomorphize. Um, oh, thank you, Cobalt. You said it's asking your partners about boundaries and getting answers, building better boundaries. That's cool. I will definitely check this out. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to copy this link, and yeah, that looks really cool. I'm going to, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing this. I have not heard of Project SETI. Yeah, I would love to know more though. Yeah, that's really cool. Scheduled for today. Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm really always curious to find out about like other consent educators, other people who want to talk about how to build better connections with people. And I think that I'm kind of interested in getting as many perspectives as possible. So it's really nice. Um, Thank you. So then, anyway, continuing friendship processes, and we are looking at these different types of relationships. And we have friendly relations moving towards friendship, nascent friendship, when you're kind of in between. You're not quite friends, but you're not acquaintances anymore. stabilized friendship, and then sometimes we can go into waning friendship. Oh yeah, I not connected to SETI then. um, okay, Project SETI. Yeah, I've not heard of that either. And then Aradin, you said, I mean, just look at how we think of animals in terms of intelligence. Um, interesting, interesting. Yeah, I would love to check that out. I like that kind of thing. Yeah, that's very cool. I will definitely check that out. Okay, so going back to this, this is generally speaking the development of friendships. We have the role limited interactions. We have we relate to each other in a friendly manner, but we're not quite friends. Moving towards friendship, nascent friendship, stabilized friendship, and waning friendship. And today we're going to talk about why do friendships sometimes fall apart and what is going on there. So it says here, I'll read this section first. The final step in, and let me put this in the chat before I forget. Ooh, I like that, Cobalt. The sperm whales communicate in clicks. Decoding their speech might help us decode alien communication. Yeah, I mean, I think that it also might help us decode, whale communication, which would be so cool. I listened to this interview years ago that was someone who charted basically whale pop culture. And she was saying that different whales, they'll have different songs that they sing for like their mating rituals that influence each other. And there are times where like the whales kind of congregate in certain areas of the world, and then new songs will become popular, and then everybody starts singing them, and it goes around. And then there have been times where there have been like unexpected interactions between different species or different pods. Okay, nice. So that is Project SETI. It was very cool interview. Anyway, getting back to the friendships. So it says here, the final step in friendship development is waning friendships. As you know, friendships do not always have a happy ending. Many friendships come to an end. Friendships may not simply come to an abrupt end. Many times there are stages that show a decline of friendship. But in Rawlings' model, the end of friendship is summed up by this step. Perhaps the relationship is too difficult to sustain over large geographic distances, or sometimes people change and grow in different directions and have little in common with old friends. Sometimes friendship rules are violated to a degree beyond repair. We spoke earlier of trust as a component of friendships. One common rule of trust is that if we tell friends a secret, they are expected to keep it a secret. If that rule is broken and a friend continually breaks your trust by telling your secrets to others, you are likely to stop thinking of them as your friend. So this is a great example of both like a common consent problem, which is like you have the right to your story, and so other people telling it is a violation of your autonomy. And a lot of the times people will do it without even thinking about it. But one of the benefits of friendship is to be able to process things with each other and process things that you don't necessarily want to or can't process with other people. And so if you have an assumption of, or even an explicit agreement to something like this stays between us, and that's violated, that's going to interfere with one of the cornerstones of a lot of friendships, which is one of the things that makes friendships close is this trust, this being able to bond. But of course, as it lists here, that's not the only thing. So let's look at some other things that can happen. First, I want to talk about friendship styles, because then it will help us understand some things that can go wrong with friendships. And this is the link. It's a social science website. Check this out as well. So friendship styles. Beyond the stages of friendship developed, different people develop different types of friendships throughout their lifetime. Sarah H. Matthews noted that ultimately people have three basic types of friendships: independent, discerning, and acquisitive. And so here they also have things that can become part of why they change. So the more independent the friendship is, the more likely these friendships change because of life events. And
Discerning is on this other end of the spectrum, friendships that tend to be more committed and long term. And it's not to say that independent friendships can't become committed, but we're going to look at what is this theory actually talking about. So independent, in her studies, Matthews found that independents often saw their friendships based on specific circumstances in their lives and not necessarily specific friends. When talking about friends, independents were most likely to talk about people they knew or people they had known, not reflecting on specific names. Independents were more likely to mention specific names when they talked about people they were interacting with currently. For example, independents talked about friends during periods of their life, elementary school, junior high, middle school, high school, and college, and not about specific people they knew for a long period of time, or long periods of life, sorry. Matthews argues that independents framed their concepts of friendships regarding major life events. They also never reported having a close, special, or best friend relationship, so during periods of major life events, they didn't have specific commitments to the people they called friends. Independents were also more likely to talk about friends as a general concept instead of specific friends. Comparing independence to the stages of friendship discussed by Rollins, you can consider these to be more along the lines of friendly relations. Matthew chooses the term independence because it reflects a more autonomous state. It was clear that most of them were not isolated people, but instead considered themselves to be sufficient unto themselves. So this idea here is to say that it's not to say that everybody who doesn't have a lot of long-term friends is necessarily this type of person, or that everybody who is this way wants to be this way. I have in my life moved many times, for example. And so because of that, especially before smartphones and, Zoom and everything, it was harder to keep friendships up after you moved. I often wanted to maintain those friendships, but lost them. And because I've moved so many times and I've had friend groups that were really close, and then there was something that went wrong in the friend group and we all completely scattered, I tend to be more on this independent side, partially because I had a lot of periods of complete loneliness in my life where I had no friends, or where the people I did consider friends were so far away and so hard to regularly keep contact with that I didn't really feel the positive effects of friendship outside of memories of those people. And even people like I'm still friends with today that I maybe have known for many, many years, if they live really far away from me, and even if I keep up contact with them, it's not going to be quite the same. And it's also one of those things where, because I didn't get a lot of practice with maintaining deep, committed, long term friendships, it's harder for me to do it because I don't have as many skills around that. One of the things we talked about in a previous stream was that there's different like stages of social development as we develop as we age. And if you miss out on certain things and you don't get to get practice, it can get harder and harder as you get older to make up the gap between the sort of like normative behavior in friendship of your peers and what you actually have experienced to be able to do well. We did talk about some strategies for overcoming that, like practicing, but practicing as much as you can in like short, controlled ways. Like, don't necessarily try to just like always meet people one-on-one for like coffee and be able to sustain a really long conversation with them. Instead, do something that's a little bit more structured, like go to the movies together, or go bowling, or go for a hike where like you're going to be doing an activity that is a clear beginning and end. It's not vague and weird, so there's no awkwardness there. You're not going to be talking the whole time. There will be lots of starts and stops. Distraction is okay in those kinds of spaces, and then you can give yourself short bursts of interaction. We also talked about things like the mirror exposure effect, which is that the more we encounter something, the more likely we are to think of it positively. So it's one of the reasons why big brands like Coca-Cola or McDonald's are so insistent on trying to get their logo on as many things as possible, and will spend tons of money to have them put into as many movies as possible, because just the mere exposure to that symbol subconsciously over time increases their positive associations with it. But we can also use that for ourselves. So if you get invited to a party or to go out with people, even if you're not feeling really up to it, go and show your face for 15 minutes, half hour, and then say you need to leave for some reason, or just say like you're tired and you want to go home. Because people just seeing your face, you saying hello, how are you to a couple of people, will start to increase the positive associations people have with you. It's also one of the effects of social media, for example. So some people are, this is sort of their personality traits in this theory, but other people are much more contextually independent. And for me, as I mentioned, as someone who moved around a lot, I have had to have many periods of my life where I've started over with friendships. And it's hard to keep them up when you haven't seen somebody in years. Cobalt, you said, oh yeah, I got messed up that way. With the gap, I assume you're talking about the gap in like being able to practice things. Aradin, it's the whole, you need 5 years of experience to get a job, but all the jobs that could give you the experience also requires 5 years of experience to get. Yes, and we can think of some strategies for improving this. One of the biggest things I mentioned many times before is that if there's nothing happening in your daily life that gives you the opportunity built in to either meet new people who could become potential friends or lovers or romantic partners, or you don't have any structure for regularly interacting with the people who could go in those directions for you, nothing's going to change. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So that's always the first step. If you want more friends, you got to make sure you're either interacting kind of regularly with the people who could be your friends that you already know, or you're putting yourself in scenarios that will increase the likelihood of meeting new people. And let's see here. Thank you. I'm glad you find it helpful, Luby. Aradin, unless it is Christmas songs or music in general, the more you hear something, the more you associate it negatively. And Cobalt, you said, yep, Luby, sometimes I think I'll only be able to stand for this for an hour. What's the point? Exactly. That's one of the things that we often talk ourselves out of these things before we even get there. I'm very guilty of this. And I can even do that with like leaving my house at all, running errands. I can be like, oh, well, it's going to be like busy and I'm going to have to wait and I'm going to forget this thing. And I have a lot of anxiety around my ADHD about like time. Like, oh, if I go out before I have this meeting, I'm definitely going to be late for it. So I have to like stay home anxiously waiting for the meeting to happen rather than like go run an errand. Yeah. Yeah, it's really complicated, all of these layers. And the more experience and practice that we get, the better off we'll be. So then let's continue here. The next one is discerning. The second type of friendship discussed by Matthews was the discerning style, which, unlike independence, is marked by a deep connection with a friend or group of friends, regardless of changing circumstances in their life. These friendships are marked by deep commitment and longevity, which also means that when a discerning person loses a friend, they are the most likely to experience a deep sense of loss in their lives. Discerners were also more likely to draw clear lines between friendly relations and friendship. Overall, the discerning identified only a very few people throughout their lives whom they considered friends. Although not all of these informants had kept these friendships, those who had valued them highly. So I think you can also be, just speaking for myself, a mixed type, because I do have some friends, like my friend who passed away this past December, who I had been friends with for almost 20 years. And even though we lived on different continents, we were around each other in high school and university, and since then had like lived very far away, we still talked really regularly. Whenever we could, there were times where we might go many months without interacting with each other, but anytime we did, it was as though no time at all had passed. And we felt very close to each other. And there are other people in that same friendship group who I feel that same way about, where no matter how much time has passed or whatever kind of drama might happen between us, it's to me unlikely that those friendships would ever no longer feel like friendships to me. And if I were to move to a place that's near where those people live, I imagine we would go right back to hanging out constantly with each other. And so it's one of those things, though, where because I've also had most of my learning around friendships being I need to be really comfortable being alone and being by myself, it is also the kind of situation where I'm not necessarily constantly looking for these intense, deep friendships. If they develop, they develop. But I'm also really okay with having no friends in my proximity and not really hanging out with people and sort of being a good friend to myself, right? That's something that's really good to do because one of the other things we've talked about, one of the things that can be a real death knell for friendships, if we go scroll back up to the top here, and if you are in friendly relations or moving towards friendship and you push the interaction too deep too quickly, you are very likely to actually kill the friendship as it's developing. And so it's really important, and this website talks a lot about each stage of friendship. It's really important that you let it develop slowly and you don't immediately say have friendly relations and then invite the person to your wedding. I mean, like I did that with a bunch of people I only knew through Twitter and whatnot. Oh, hi, Danos. Okay, just chatting stream for a technical question. Awesome. Um, Let me know what your technical question is. Also, video hung again. Now it's back. Okay, good. I'll wait for your question. I'm going to keep chatting a little bit. Also, I'm sad about the technical difficulties today. I don't know this bot that comes up. It's so weird. Anyway, if you move too quickly, if you try to push it too fast, it can be something that scares people off or makes it really awkward. And with dating, there are some like slightly different things. Like if you're becoming friends with somebody and you want to start dating them, sometimes people wait a little bit too long to like ask somebody out. And this is something that happens, I think, especially to a lot of guys, especially young guys who are, generally speaking, let's say feminist and very respectful, and they're shy and nervous, and they kind of wait a little too long and they miss that sort of like confluence magic moment or moments when both people kind of feel that spark. Because if I like somebody and I get the impression that they don't actually like me that way, I'm probably going to let go of those feelings. And once you let go of those feelings, it can be really hard to get them to come back. The friendship doesn't tend to go away, but that like romantic spark, it can be harder to bring back if the person has sort of let go of it. Anyway, Danos, what did you say? So yeah, I started subbing and buying bits recently on Twitch. Just wanted to ask a streamer, can streamers see my full name and email when I'm subbing or donating bits? I'm doing it through this Xsolla thing. I don't think so. I have subscribers and I've never been able to see the people's information. I can like see what their username is, but nothing else. Is there a particular reason why you're concerned about people seeing your full name? Do you just want privacy and everything? All right, well, I'll wait for more information. So, yeah, jumping too quickly ahead in friendship can be difficult. So, that's one way why friendships can fail. Thanks, Krellin. I appreciate the compliment. Okay, so then acquisitive. The final friendship style discussed by Matthews is the acquisitive style. Acquisitives are people who moved through their lives collecting a variety of friendships, allowing circumstances to make the possible meeting of likely candidates, but then committing themselves to the friendships once they were made. at the very least for the period of time during which they and their friends were geographically proximate. Unlike the independents, acquisitive discussed having close connections with all of the friends they've met. Oh, thanks for the follow. Oh, you said, yep, I want privacy because, okay, I like all those streams, but I don't know them at the same time. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it is, yeah, it is good. And I agree with Krellin. It is a consent question. Like, is my privacy protected when I engage with these people? And I think that's a really important one because if you don't want your name sort of being put around and you don't want people to be able to like look up who this is or whatever, it's good. And it's also protection so you don't get, say, doxxed by somebody. I always recommend doing a Google of all of your usernames that you might use, especially because even if your current username isn't connected to like identifying information on the internet, some of your others, like say social media profiles, may have this username say connected to it. So if someone is really hunting for your private information, you might have left like a breadcrumb trail of usernames and account names. And so I recommend, yeah, if you want to really keep your privacy, just taking a quick look, asking for web pages to be taken down if you can, removing like say old tweets, maybe changing your Facebook sort of handle because that's often people made them like 10 plus years ago when it first came out and it was like a username they were using and then it like links, they forget about it and it links to all these other things and it becomes really easy for people to like reverse engineer it to like find you. And so it can be really a good way to protect your privacy is just see, is there sort of a connection across your accounts and identifiers. All right. So in essence, these individuals develop a strong core group of friends as they go throughout their lives while acquiring new ones depending on changes within their lives. So as you can imagine, all three of these types are still legitimate friendships. They are not superficial. They're not, one is not better than the other. And it's the kind of thing where people might shift in between these types throughout their lifetime. But you can also imagine that sometimes if there are mismatches, this can be not necessarily mismatches, but if there are different types of people in a friendship, there can be a cause for tension because of basically like different expectations and priorities in the friendship. That'd be good to communicate about. Good question. So I have a degree in psychology and I worked in a cognitive psych lab for many years, but I am the co-director of an international nonprofit that aims to teach about consent as part of everyday life. And we're a team of psychologists and social workers and sex educators and doulas and all kinds of different things. My specialty and one of my masters is in linguistics, but I specialized in like sociolinguistics and interpersonal communication skills. So my job for many years was teaching people how to work better in like international environments and to help reduce the risk of conflict and like team dysfunction. But I also studied a lot about how to prevent group violence. How do you prevent things like genocide, but also smaller types of violence? So we have a really diverse group of volunteers and people who work together to create all of our material with all kinds of different backgrounds. And so we really have a lot of different perspectives on things. And if you're ever interested, if you check out our website, we have our class schedule. A lot of our classes are free or we have discounted tickets. Like we do a consent basics class twice a month, and we have discussion groups that are free, and we have a ton of classes on a whole different types of topics, and you should check it out if you're interested. Okay, so let's talk a bit more and about friendships. So there's good and bad friendships. And I don't necessarily like binaries. If you've watched many of our streams, I'm very anti-binary bias. Um, and binary bias is when we tend to want to group things into two discrete categories and then define them by their differences. And so we want to be careful of that. But this guide, generally speaking, has some good information here. So the things that are, and instead of using healthy, I prefer the word like sustainable versus unsustainable, because it's not necessarily unhealthy, but it's going to be difficult to sustain that relationship over time. And the first one here is contempt. And this is the biggest one I want to talk about. If there is contempt in a friendship, a romantic relationship, family connections, interactions with your coworkers, it is really hard to sustain that kind of friendship. And once contempt builds up, it can become bitterness, and it can lead to a whole ton of other problems. So it's Cobalt, you said, I'm confused by sober and animus. Yeah, this one, I don't 100% know what this means here, but animus is sort of like, I don't know why they say sober, but animus is like animosity, I think. And so I think it's more like they're not, maybe it's in contrast to playfulness, like if the relationship is excessively serious versus there's no playfulness to it. And there's some animosity versus fondness, is what I assume. Because I was also confused when I was like sober and animus, because it could be a positive thing to be sober about it, but animus I think is similar to animosity. Okay, so let's just talk about contempt a little bit. And we have other things like honest trust versus suspicion. Suspicion is one of those things that you can often work through, and trust is something that usually builds over time. Everybody's got like a baseline threshold for how much trust we give at the beginning. And also it can be contextually dependent. Like there are certain types of people I'm more likely to trust immediately, and there are types of people I'm not likely to trust immediately. Like I don't tend to trust politicians on anything that they say, like as a baseline. But I am likely to say trust somebody who's, like a little kid. I tend to think little kids are pretty chill and are not out to deceive me or hurt me or do anything nefarious. And so I do tend to give a lot of trust immediately to small children. Though I do know that you should never take like a cookie or something offered to you by a small child, because it might look like a delicious treat, but it's actually the flu every time. So I'm always suspicious of that. And then being honest versus untruthful. These are things that can also be worked through, right? Like if something comes up, you can often work through these things together and get to the root of why trust was broken or why somebody lied about something. Are we focused on supporting each other or hindering each other? This can be also things like being excessively competitive. Sometimes some amount of like friendly camaraderie type competitiveness can be really positive. Like if I'm playing, Mario Party or something with my friends, it's good for us to be a little like, haha, I'm going to win. But there's always a limit to which you wouldn't want to take it too far, right? You wouldn't want it to say bleed outside of the game to becoming this kind of like stress inducing, like, I can't believe you beat me. Like, why would you, use that trick? Why would you use that like power up or whatever? You'd want to be able to maintain those boundaries. And then here, you also want to be able to, this is really important, keep your identity separate. This is something that also goes wrong in a lot of romantic relationships and family relationships, is if your identities start to become really wrapped up in each other, it can be really hard. Now, this is not the same thing as codependency. People often misuse the word codependency to mean people who are like really together or have really like entwined identities. But codependency is much more like if I'm the kind of person who's an alcoholic and I need to feel like I'm not a bad person by getting people to constantly come to my aid and my rescue. And like, I need somebody also who's going to facilitate my drinking by, cleaning me up, making sure I don't get too injured, and also like buying me alcohol regularly. And then the codependency would come in if I'm in a relationship with somebody who needs to feel needed in order to feel good about themselves. And so by me being like so in a state of struggle and being like sick from drinking too much and hungover and needing to get driven around places and like in this sort of precarious scenario, if someone really needed to feel needed and maybe wanted to have some power over as well, and they were the person who was, say, also going out and buying me alcohol and providing me with the means by which I'm hurting myself, which is also the means by which I need them, that would be codependency. So codependency is not the same as people who are like really, really like together and like to do everything together. That can just be really enmeshed or just, like a really close relationship or friendship. But if your identities become too intertwined, that can become a really unhealthy thing over time, really unsustainable. Because it also means that if there's ever any conflict, it's likely to feel far more stressful and intense than it actually is, because it becomes a threat to your actual identity if there's conflict between you and your friend or romantic partner, if your identities are too intertwined. And also, sustainable friendships should be things that make you feel good about yourself. If they're things that regularly make you feel bad about yourself, you should probably stop being friends with that person. That can be hard to do. It can be hard to let go of friendships. But if you really feel like worse after you hang out with somebody, it's really worth investigating what's going on there. And, here, like comforting versus stressful, genuine and benevolent versus manipulative and exploitative, etc. Healthy versus toxic. And I want to talk a little bit more about contempt. And this is one of the things we're going to talk about this week and probably next week as well, a little bit. And there's this good article from Psychology Today that's just called Why Friendships End. So let's look through this a little bit. There's a nice quote at the beginning: life is balance of holding on and letting go, and it's from Rumi. People really like Rumi. I like Rumi's poetry as well. It is important to remember that most of the time Rumi's poetry and writing is talking about God and Islam. People really like to take it out of context and say it's like about love, and it is about love, but it's about love for God. And I think it's really important to acknowledge like what Rumi was actually wanting to talk about a lot of the time. Aradani said, it can also make it much tougher to notice any red flags that come up if your identity is heavily intertwined. 100%, 100%. And I've definitely had friendships where that happened, where we like became so sort of caught up in each other and what each other was doing. And we had like shared goals. Like I moved from Japan to France with a friend of mine. And we both wanted to go to do like master's programs. I was trying to do a double master's in cognitive psychology and fine art. And we had this big plan that we came up with together, and we like moved there together, and we like had all this stuff. And then it got really fucked up at the end. And we like are never going to talk to each other ever again for numerous reasons. But we had like all of our life goals and our senses of who we were, because we kind of helped build each other up towards these goals, way too intertwined. And then it meant that once I started dating somebody, Charlie, my now partner, that it was like a threat to everything. And it really became just an absolute shit show. Anyway, okay, so let's read a little bit. Breakups are not limited to romantic relationships. The painful and potentially agonizing process we associate with partnerships can pertain to friendships as well. And this is really true. Losing a friend, especially after something like a big argument or a stressful experience, is very similar to romantic relationships breaking up. Why would it not? Similar to our romantic partnerships, friends are influential in our lives. They are there to listen to us, encourage us, and help us. Friendships help to improve our happiness, confidence, worth, and coping while giving us a sense of belonging. Not to mention, many friendships may outlast romantic relationships. The combined connection and investment in companionship is bound to make it difficult to cope if the bond comes to an end. At times, the cause may be blatantly clear, mutually agreed upon, and beneficial. However, the schism can seem sudden, unsettling, or unwarranted. When this happens, you may find yourself baffled and hurt. This pain could inhibit you from letting go. We are hardwired to empathize. Typically, we are drawn to friends who will provide reciprocity in the areas we value: time, energy, and love. A common cause of dwindling friendship is the simple lack of balance. Here are some examples of imbalances that may contribute to friendship breakup. So the first one here is caring and sharing. For many, a fundamental aspect of friendship is caring. Compassion is related to happiness in a partnership. Love and care can vary on how they are provided and received. It is possible that although both friends are sharing care, cross signals can cause misinterpretation of affection. On the other hand, it's quite possible that there is an actual imbalance in care, ultimately causing a friend to feel misunderstood, disrespected, minimized, and/or hurt. So an example of this can be like something I've talked about before of I've had friends where they had a car and I didn't, and to get to them would take me like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes on public transit, but it would have been a 15-minute drive for them. And they almost always insisted that I meet them at the like mall that was only, like a 2-minute drive from where they lived. They said it's because they didn't want to drive into the city where I lived. They lived in like a little suburb outside of the city. And it was not a big deal at first, but over time, over the course of like a year, it became really, really tiring to be on public transit like for 3 hours there and back every time I wanted to see this friend, and them basically never being willing to come into the city to see me instead, even though, like I had a guest parking spot at my apartment complex and everything. It would have been fine. But the real kicker was that they would often come in if someone else had invited them in and they were also going to see me. And so that was the kind of thing where I felt like this person, we are friends. I really enjoy hanging out with them. However, they don't like me enough to actually want to come into the city for me, but they would for somebody else. And this is also one of those things, I've recommended it before. There's a book, it's a little controversial. It's called He's Not That Into You. It is definitely a bit outdated, a bit sexist. It's basically a guide for heterosexual women for how to tell if a heterosexual man is really interested in them or not. And some of the advice is sexist. It's very much like you should never be the person to ask the guy out or whatever. But overall, I would say like the core thesis of the book is actually very accurate, which is that people show you how they feel about you, especially over time. 3 times is enough to call something a pattern, right? If somebody does something to you or treats you in a certain way at least 3 times, it should be at that point considered to be a pattern of behavior. And we should look at that. We don't always have to say that this is a deal breaker in a relationship or a friendship, but we should be considering the fact that people are showing us how they feel about us, how they want to prioritize things. Sometimes it's important to just have a direct conversation with people about it. It can be really helpful for the friendship to just say like, hey, I'm not feeling so great about this right now. Can we talk about what's going on here? And I've talked about it before on the stream, so I'll just share it briefly. There is a skill called Dear Man. It is from interpersonal effectiveness in dialectical behavioral therapy. It's also basically the same skills from nonviolent communication.
And it's basically a framework and an order of operations for saying to somebody, I have an ask, and reducing the risk of them becoming defensive or saying no to you. And so this is the guide to it. And I'm not going to go over it now because we've talked about it many times, but I do want to share it with everybody. So a lot of times friendships require maintenance, like everything, and having this tool as a way to say, like, can we have a conversation, or to have a specific ask instead of just saying, like, can we have a conversation about this, can be really helpful, especially if you're nervous about it or you feel like it's going to be awkward. I love Dear Man. These tools from interpersonal effectiveness I have used almost every day of my life since I was about 14 years old. For those who don't know, I was a big nerd. My hobby was going to things like Goodwill and looking for used college textbooks and buying them, especially psychology textbooks. And so it was my hobby to read psych textbooks in middle school and high school because, again, I'm a big nerd. And once I learned those skills, yeah, is exactly in quotes, Aradin. I still am, but I have always been, we should say. But ever since I learned about these skills, I've used them every day. They're very, very useful. So I do recommend reading about Dear Man and then also the two other skills, which is Give and Fast. Anyway, so if you never talk about this, this is one of the ways in which resentment, bitterness, and contempt build up. If there's an imbalance in the friendship, it's got to be addressed, or it's never that you are absolutely starting a countdown timer to that relationship ending or becoming no longer bearable for the people involved. It's stressful to hear this for a lot of people, and it doesn't mean that you have to always bring up the issue exactly in the moment when it happens. There's such a thing as acute stress and trauma responses. If I have an interaction that really stresses me out, my go-to stress response is to smile and laugh. It's called fawning. And it's basically, I go along with whatever's happening. And then sometimes later, it takes me some time to figure out, did I actually feel okay with what happened in that scenario? And this is one of the things that's also important, where this past Sunday, I didn't really talk about it, but one of the people in chat was asking what I think about people like retroactively revoking consent. And one of the other things that's true about that is, like, stress and trauma responses are real. They're mediated by the autonomic or the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. They're not under conscious control. You cannot just not have one of these responses. And so if you're in a fawn response or a freeze response, for example, you are very likely to go along with whatever is happening. And then it's going to take you might even say that you consent in the moment, and then it's going to take you time later to process what happened, maybe even years to figure it out. Yes, exactly. Trooper tangented the stream in the best way possible. There was like so many things I could have said in response to that, but this is one of those things. And the thing that gets scary about that, like, this is also one of those things that makes people afraid of consent, is because they think, like, well, what if I do everything right and I think I have consent from this person, and then they come tell me after the fact, maybe even years later, that it wasn't actually consensual. And this is one of the reasons why we have to be careful of a good bad binary, and also why our model of consent does not work very well with the criminal justice system and carceral justice. Because if I want to tell somebody, hey, like, some sex that we had wasn't very consensual, and here's where I feel like it wasn't consensual, if the only framework we have for discussing that is punitive justice that would say that that person is then bad and they need to be put in prison, means we're never going to have those conversations unless I'm personally comfortable with putting that person in prison. And also, like, more than 90% of, say, sexual assault never results in any help from the criminal justice system whatsoever. So it's already leaving out the 90% plus of all the people who experience this. So it's not effective, first of all. But second of all, that's not going to be what heals me, right? The thing that's going to be healing to me is talking through it and getting resources, physical safety, emotional safety, getting probably therapy, and getting an apology and an actual understanding from the person that harmed me. Most of the time, when I think about people who've hurt me in my life, the two things I want the most are usually to not have to be around that person anymore, especially if the harm was really serious. And then also, I would really love for them to like actually get it, like get why what they did was wrong, and maybe apologize to me. But I would much rather them just like get it and like really understand in like a deep way, hey, I'm really sorry for this. I had one of these experiences recently with a good friend of mine that I met up with at the funeral, and we had fallen out with each other over some things that he had said to me many years ago and like other aspects of our friendship. And he spent a good amount of time being like, yeah, I was a real douchebag to you. Did not treat you well. I was not very nice to you. Here's exactly what I did wrong. And here's why I know it wasn't okay. And that was great. Like I had long since forgiven him. I was just like, whatever, like we were in our early 20s and all going through shit. And I don't even remember the details anymore. So clearly it's not that important to me. But like I had forgotten that we'd even fallen out until we saw each other in person. And I was like, oh, right. Like there was something you said to me that made me never want to talk to you again. I don't even remember what that was. But anyway, that was really all that it needed. If he had said those things to me 10 plus years prior, we probably would have stayed closer than we are even now. Because all I really needed to hear from him was, hey, I know what I did was wrong. Here's why it's wrong. Can you forgive me? That's not to say that's what everybody needs, but anyway. I see Cobalt, you said, yeah, keep seeing people talk about getting rid of predators, but never discussing reducing predatory behaviors among people. So related to that, me and my other co-director are hoping to become certified in this new program called STARSA. Let me actually show STARSA. Let me see. I think it's spelled like this. Nope. Give me a second. I gotta find the link. I know I have it saved. Give me 1 second. I have to get it out of my email. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact link at this moment. But there's this government program. Yes, exactly, Luby. It may have taken him those 10 years to figure it out himself. 100%, which is again part of why I'm just like, it's chill. I appreciate the apology. I appreciate the talking. And that was really what was necessary. There we go. There we go. I found it. Okay, I spelled it wrong. No wonder. Okay, so it's called STARSA, and it's new, it's public domain. I met with one of the people who created it, and it is a treatment program that's mostly going to be used. There's two manuals, they're both public domain. There's the CBT manual for like clinical practitioners, and then there's an AP manual, which is more like a psychoeducation, so it can be easily done by people who are not clinicians. And it's science-based treatment to reduce the risk of sexual assault and like sexually sort of harmful behaviors, especially in young adults. So teenagers, college age kids, but it's useful, information across the lifespan. And me and the other co-director are actually hoping to become like officially, legally, whatever, certified in practicing this, because one of the things that happens
and this is something that's really relevant to friendships and why friendships fail, is nobody gets to be like a harmful person overnight. Nobody just wakes up and says, you know what sounds good? I just went and like beat some people up for fun. Nobody does that. I mean, like, I'm sure there have been like a couple of people in all of human history. There's billions of people alive now, but for the most part, the vast majority of people who cause harm, especially who cause repeated harms, you know, the people we might consider to be predators. Oh, thank you, SP Fee, for the other manual or the link, the AP one. That's really good. And here I'll put this one in as well. This is the CBT one. And welcome. So, you know, if nobody gets there overnight, right? The kind of people who commit everything from domestic violence to just being like a shitty partner or a shitty friend, it takes thousands of thresholds being crossed for that behavior to become consistent, to become a pattern. And it's usually small. It's almost always starts with like subtle acts of bias, subtle acts of being inconsiderate, subtle things, subtle boundary crossings that don't get pushback or don't get any kind of like serious pushback. And unfortunately, every time we interact with that kind of behavior, we witness it in a friend or a family member or a loved one of any kind, and we don't respond to it at all. And again, it doesn't have to be right in the moment, but if we never say anything about it, we never push back, then it ends up being reinforced, and the person on some level tends to learn that it is socially acceptable and or that it gets them what they want and that it is an acceptable tool to use to achieve some goal. That's also a certain type of harm. A lot of harms are harms that are not premeditated. They are harms that happen because in the pursuit, we could call them collateral harms, in the pursuit of another goal. Where like I might want something, and people in getting the thing I want, people get hurt as an aside. We just had a class this past weekend on accountability processes 101. And I want to share with you one of the slides from that. So just give me a moment to get it up because it's relevant to what we're talking about. And we will be teaching this class again regularly if you are interested in it. Let me just get the slide up. Which one is it? 1 second. Here we go. All right, I'm going to bring it over here. Okay. So I have this slide. Let me see if I can zoom in. No, can't zoom in. Okay. So this is about as big as I can make it, unfortunately. So here we have this idea of like common roots of harm, unintentional. The majority of harm is entirely unintentional. These are the most common everyday harms. This doesn't mean that they don't need to be like acknowledged. Like if I accidentally step on someone's foot, I should acknowledge that I stepped on their foot and say sorry. There's relational behaviors that are not intentionally harmful, but oh wow, follower goal met today. Thank you, Pattern Juggler 98. That's really great. I did not expect to meet that goal. So relational here, harms that are not inherently harmful but cause harm in certain contexts. So my favorite example of this is one in my own life, which is I'm the kind of person, because of my ADHD, that whatever is right in front of me is like the only thing that exists. And most of the time, that's not a problem. If I'm dating someone who's like really secure in their attachment, they're really self-confident and really independent, that's great. It's fine. It doesn't cause any problems. But I did in the past date a lot of people who were very anxious people and who were really kind of preoccupied with, you know, is this relationship good? Does this person like me? And so whenever they were my focus, whenever they were what was in front of me, I made them feel like the only person in the world.
And then when I would say need to, go back to work or go back to university during the week and be focused on that, because I would during the week, I was like, I'm not going out on dates during the week. I'm not going drinking. I'm not partying. Like that's only Friday and Saturday night because the rest of the time I'm like focused on school. Whenever I was dating that kind of person, it would be torture for them. I would still send good morning and good night texts and stuff, but I could not like spend hours on the phone with them every day. I couldn't do these things that they really needed. And neither of us were inherently, doing anything wrong. But the more anxious they got, the more trapped I felt and the more I wanted to like distance myself from them. And because I don't like feeling controlled. But then they also felt neglected. And so that would be relational harm. We were both hurting each other because we were incompatible in these really fundamental ways. So one of the ways I took accountability for this many years ago was I just stopped dating that kind of person. And if I met somebody and even if I really liked them, if I started to realize they're the kind of person who needs genuinely constant reassurance from me that I still like them, I'm not going to be good for them no matter how hard I try. I cannot do right by them. It's the same reason why Charlie and I no longer are polyamorous. We're like monogamish, as I usually say. But it's because I realized that as much as I learned a lot of really good things from polyamory, I'm not good at being good consistently to that many people at the same time. Okay, so the next type of harm we could say is collateral. When in the course of getting what they want, they harm others. The harm wasn't the goal, but it wasn't enough to stop them. So this would be something like, I really want the room to be quiet. And maybe I've asked people a few times, be quiet, and nobody's listening to me. So then I like scream and throw things and scare people into being quiet. Now that could be harmful. That might be really traumatic or just like genuinely trust breaking or frightening, or people are going to feel unsafe. I picked up a chair and I threw it across the room to get what I wanted. And the goal was not to scare people. The goal was I wanted quiet. And I hurt people in the course of getting that quiet. The next kind of harm would be sort of negligent harm, when someone knows there is a risk of harm but does not try to prevent it or does not take risk reduction steps. So that would be, I think a lot of those kinds of things are things like, drunk driving, for example. And drunk driving is a good thing, I think a good example of a way we can talk about preventing harm. Because even if nobody gets hurt, if I get into a car and I drive and I'm too intoxicated, hi Jakey, I'm going to lose my driver's license. Because it doesn't matter if somebody got hurt or not. The risk of harm is so great that we've decided as a world that we need to prevent people from doing that as much as we can. And so negligent harm is like, I know that this might hurt people, but I'm not going to take the steps to prevent it. And then emotionally driven, this is also really common. The actions arise out of a need to express strong emotions. Sometimes harm is intended. So this would be like, if I'm arguing with somebody and I want to express how upset or how hurt I am, I might say something that I know will hurt that person. Like I might compare them to their father or something that I know it's going to be really hard for them to hear. And it's not something I would say otherwise. It's probably not even something I actually mean, but I'm needing to express a really strong emotion. That, however, it doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean I didn't hurt them. And then the rarest kind of harm would be the truly premeditated harm that is the actual goal of an action, similar to emotionally driven harms, but usually coming from a place of calm actions. And so the thing is, though, especially with things like collateral harm, this is one of the things that we want to be really on the lookout for in friendships. Because if our friend is starting to do things like belittling people, or they are crossing other types of boundaries, we want to call them out on it. Or we can call them in, whatever you like. Because if we don't, it's going to be seen as basically implicit endorsement of the behavior. And this is one of the things that also makes a lot of friendships fall apart. We wait until the conversation is almost impossible to have it. We don't have hard conversations when they're easier to have. We don't intervene when we see somebody displaying behaviors that are not so great, like someone's making, say, homophobic jokes all the time. We don't tell our friend, hey, cut it out. That's not funny. Like, I'm not going to keep hanging out with you if you keep making those jokes, which, by the way, that's how you basically set a boundary. A boundary is not about what the other person can and can't do. It's you saying what kinds of situations you are or aren't willing to participate in, and at what point you're going to remove yourself from the situation. Because it's not about dominating somebody. I say, I'm not going to keep hanging out. It's been a whole year. Hi, Dustin. 12 more months. Wow, thank you. And Jakey, I see that you said, I'm going to Vienna in April for my birthday. Awesome. Let me know. We can totally meet up if you want. No pressure or anything, but I'd be happy to take you to a cafe or something. Yeah, that's exciting. And so then here we can think of a lot of ways in which we can help our friends not go down a dark path that's hard to recover from, and why it's important. So then, if there are imbalances in a friendship or any kind of relationship, the sooner we start to address them, the less likely it is to be the end of that connection. Nice. Volks Theater is a really nice area. So here, sharing and caring, this also comes to one of those things that I was talking about, where if we move through the stages of development in a friendship too quickly, we can also kill the friendship before it has time to really blossom. So oversharing can also be a factor. If a friend trusts and values another and hopes to share to seek insight or comfort, but the disclosure falls flat, this may rupture the bond. Additionally, a friend may overshare consistently, which can be overwhelming. Although the role of a friend is to provide support, a constant cloud of negativity can be deleterious to your connection. In addition to oversharing, within the relationship, sharing may reach beyond the partnership. As in a romantic relationship, unless it's otherwise discussed, the perception of broken trust may cause a crack that slowly continues to fissure. So here, this is not to say that you can't share with people. You always just want to think about, though, like, does it make sense for me to say this thing to this person in this moment? If I'm really stressed out, say, like, I seem stressed and my friend says to me, hey, you seem stressed. Is there anything going on? That's not necessarily, I need to launch into the entire sordid history of my family and like how dysfunctional it is. That's going to be overwhelming to them, especially if I'm not that close to them, and especially if they don't know that much about my family. But it also might not be great if every time I talk to them, I end up talking about my family. It's like similar, like half the time these days when I go see my dad in person, he ends up talking about my mom and the divorce and stuff. And I'm like, y'all got divorced when I was 9. Like, I'm good with it. And my dad, we talked about it. I think that there's still things he's looking to resolve that we haven't resolved, but I don't know what those are. So I can't really help him figure that out. But if that was all we ever talked about, it would become stressful to interact with him. The fact that it's something we just talk about semi regularly, at least once anytime I go visit in person, is not the best, but it's manageable. Also, like, that bond is much, much stronger. He's my dad and I like my parents, generally speaking. And so think about if every time you see your friend, you're complaining about the same kinds of things or giving a ton of details about your stresses, think about trying to balance that a little bit. I try to always start with positive things in general in interacting with people. And part of that is what's called anchoring bias, which is that
our brains naturally prioritize the first pieces of information that we're given. So if you ever have to tell somebody good news and bad news, if you don't want the bad news to hurt as much, I recommend starting with the good news because their brain will give that more emotional weight and priority. Conversely, if you're always leading with the bad news, that's likely to make it more stressful. And yeah, Rodden, your friends are not your therapist. Your friends can be there for you. They can be emotionally supporting. They can, there are certain things that they can do that therapists can't do, like serve as a distraction or like help you with very like logistical things. And there can be some overlap with like empathetic listening, but you want to make sure it stays balanced and it doesn't overtake the relationship. And there are cultural differences. There are some cultures where complaining is considered to be social bonding, and I would imagine in those spaces people don't feel as stressed out by that. However, there's always going to be limits to it. Luby said, I have one friend that is just too easily overwhelmed, so I have to ask if they have the mental bandwidth to hear about my issue first before I talk about anything negative. Yeah, I mean, I think that's good consent practice. Your friend has made this clear, and I think that's good, like to respect that. And yeah, I always try to be mindful of that myself. I'm very much the kind of person who's a real open book, and I feel really comfortable sharing as just like a general thing. But I have to be really mindful that I don't just like overshare and like overload people. I often get like retroactively anxious about interactions I had with people being like, oh, did I overshare? I do that sometimes on the stream. After the stream, I'm like, oh man, I shared too many things about myself. And generally speaking, what I ask myself in the streams is this thing I'm sharing like either something fun to share, or is it like going to give an example or good context or something? And otherwise, I just try to keep it chill. Yeah, Cobalt, I also agree with you. My sense of quote normal is off. I often don't realize something will be shocking or negative. Yeah, I basically the trick, I have the same thing. And oh wow, what is that music? Where is that coming from? Oh my goodness. Okay, I know where it's coming from. It was coming from this. The stream started. I had it open to like uh look at later and just completely was shocked by that. I was like, whoa. Yeah, thanks for joining, Cobalt. Enjoy the stream. It was very shocking. I was like, whoa, was this something to do with like the heart hands emoji? Yeah, YouTube does start randomly sometimes. Thanks, Cobalt, for joining. I've had that happen where I had like YouTube videos in the background to like watch after a meeting or something, and then like they'll just start playing during the meeting, and it's stressful. Anyway, yeah, I thought it was like some kind of like setting I had set up or something and didn't realize Loopy, but no, it's okay. And even if it was, it wouldn't be a problem. Okay, so then going back to this, oversharing, it's tough. Yeah, jazzy heart hands. But generally speaking, trying to keep it a bit balanced, trying to be considerate of, is it always me sharing? Do I remember to ask the person how their day is going or what's new with them? And like, I really can't overstress the usefulness of having notes in like a notes app about your friends. Like, because it can be hard for me to always remember, and it can be hard for me to even remember like things we talked about previously. But I tend to keep a running list of like my friends' boundaries that they've shared with me, likes and dislikes, their birthday, do they like gifts, do they like surprises, like what's their favorite dessert, if they've told me they have a favorite food, what is that? And that kind of thing. And I also tend to keep a bit of information about like, did they tell me about some sort of stress to do with, say, a family member getting surgery? So that way I can remember to ask them. This is part of me trying to like take responsibility for the ways in which ADHD and just general life busyness can interfere with the ways I want to show up for people and the ways I want to be good to people. And this is not to say I need to do this with every aspect of my ADHD by any means. I could not. It's literally not possible. But it is something I want to do related to the things that are important to me. I want to be good to my friends in these ways. So I try really hard to remember this stuff. And this is a part of the caring because I want to care for my friends, but I'm not always good at doing it. And I'm not always good at doing it consistently. So having this notes on my phone for each friend, and like before I go to hang out with them, I like take a quick look at it so I remember, is really nice. Jake, you said, sometimes I wish I had someone to tap on my shoulder when I'm being weird or oversharing or not getting the vibe or whatever. Yeah, for serious. Sometimes, so there's one tool that we can use in accountability, like alternatives for accountability and like community accountability processes. And that's to have what's called an accountability buddy. So it would be somebody who like knows the thing you're trying to work on and who is there in like public spaces with you or whatever to support that. So I've been an accountability buddy for people who have a tendency to like drunk text their exes. So whenever we would drink together, I would literally take their phone so they couldn't have it. And I would go and like hide it somewhere, lock it in the car, that's like very far away or something so that they couldn't get access to it. That was like kind of a hard accountability thing. But one of the things Charlie and I do with each other is sometimes both of us have a tendency to be unaware of how loud we're being. And so if one of us is getting too loud, especially in a public space, we just kind of do this little like hand gesture like this, just a little up and down. And it's probably clear to other people what we're doing, but it's a thing where we regularly help each other with that because it's very much an ADHD thing to have a hard time. My volume often reflects the intensity of my excitement about what I'm talking about. I can either get really quiet when I'm really excited or really loud, and that's hard for me to even recognize. So Charlie and I just kind of both like do this little hand motion, and that's an accountability thing. We both want to make sure we're not yelling and freaking people out just because we get too excited. Arad, and you said, yeah, I had that with a streamer where certain amounts of trigger certain alerts. They hadn't streamed in a few weeks and they were doing their first stream back after taking a break due to physical and mental issues. So I wanted to help support them, but the amount triggered a very loud T-Rex roar. I felt so bad. Yeah, I mean, I have like some audio alerts, like obviously like when a subscriber or like a follower comes up, mostly because I want to make sure I acknowledge it and the sound is really helpful. But there's so much other functionality that people have. Yeah. Aradini said to Jakey, yeah, it can be tough as these things change from person to person. And then Jakey, you said, I'd love an accountability buddy that would text me when I'm being weird or off-putting and they know it's unintentional in a social setting. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things I try to do this kind of stuff with my friends. To me, it's a way of showing that I care for my friends is I talk with them about it beforehand. I don't just like spring it on them. But I'll say like, would you ever want me to say, let you know if you've got something in your teeth or hanging out of your nose? All right, what would you want me to tell you if like your fly was down or like your shirt looked weird on you or it was on backwards or something? But then also like, do you ever want me to tell you if like it's real cringe the way you're flirting with somebody or like whatever, and be a support in that kind of way. Okay. So then let's look at the next one here. We have time and energy. Friendships may dwindle due to a difference in the investment of time and energy. It may seem as though these are one and the same. However, when considering quality in relationships, they may not be. It could be as direct as recognizing a difference in measurable time. However, before you pull out your calendars and calculators, please know that it isn't always that clear. Quantifying how one invests in a relationship varies from person to person. Regardless of the time invested, the quality of the experience may vary. Recognizing this could cause an individual to feel taken for granted, disrespected, and unloved. So this is one that can also overlap a lot with sharing and caring. And it's really important to just think about, like, do I actually invest in this person? It's also good to, even before that, maybe slow down and think, what does it mean for me to be invested in a friendship or a relationship? Like, that's a question I think a lot of people don't actually ask themselves. Like, what does it mean to actually be invested? What would that look like? How would I know if I'm investing in somebody well enough? And not just assume, like, by sheer force of, like, the fact that I'm cool, it's going to be an investment or whatever. Like, that can be, but also, like, it's got to go beyond that at some point. And, if I'm always the person who calls, if I'm always the person who initiates the things, invites the person out, maybe it's not a problem, but sometimes it can become a problem over time. Rodden, you said they had completely forgotten about the alert, so it jump scared everyone, including me. Wow. And Jakey, there are some people who want to hang out a lot in a week and then they don't for 3 months, but they don't hate you or want to stop being your friend. This person picks up right where they left off when they hang out again or text or whatever. Yeah, Luby, I'm the same. I'm very much like that. And sometimes it's just because I get busy. Time can go by really fast. I do try to, and I've mentioned this on a previous stream, a really good practice to have to, like, both improve friendships, use the mere exposure effect, but also improve your mood. It's been shown that this can be something that's really helpful, especially if you're dealing with, like, depression or anxiety, is to just send your friends a text message or a little, instant message of any kind with just a simple, pleasant message. I often will take time, once or twice a week to spend 10 or 15 minutes. I usually put on a little timer because I either am going to get way over invested in it or I'm going to, like, get stressed out that I'm going to take too long and not do it. To just send friends a couple of nice messages and just say to them, like, I'm thinking of you, or send a song or a meme that said, oh, this reminded me of you. Or, like, oh, I wish we could hang out or something. And just doing that as much as I can, at least once a week, 10, 15 minutes, maybe twice a week, is nice, because I can sometimes, without even realizing it, go months between seeing somebody. And it's not because I don't like them. It's just time goes fast and I don't realize how fast it's gone. And, it's one of those things where it might not always be reciprocated, and it can be tough if your friends also already have a lot of friends or they're really socially busy people. I have some friends here that I really like, and we haven't really gotten into the, like, stable friendship. We're in the sort of nascent friendship where we interact semi-regularly, but it's in stops and starts, and they're always busy, but we really like each other and we have a lot of respect for each other and a lot of admiration and interest, but we haven't had the opportunity to actually interact enough. Or I've had things where there are people I like and they invite me out constantly, but they're inviting me to things that I don't want to go to. Like, you're literally inviting me to an orgy in the middle of a pandemic, I'm definitely not going. And it's tough because I appreciate the invite. So one of the things I also like to do is, if someone invites me to something I can't go to, I take time to thank them and also give them a reason why I can't go. Like, I'm married and not really interested in orgies at this point in my life. Or, like, if I were to go to one, it would be as a consent advocate, like someone there to reduce the risk of harm happening and be there to talk to people if something goes wrong. I'm always down to support other people's fun and adventures and to reduce risk. Like, that's also very fulfilling for me. And yes, also, Jakey, I'm happy to get invited, but don't always want to go to things. Being given the opportunity to say no is actually a really nice thing. And it's nice, it's just part of consent practice.
if someone already makes the decision for you and says, well, this person's unlikely to go, so I'm not going to invite them, unless I've told somebody, like, I don't want to be invited to these things or whatever, it's nice. It's just nice to be thought of. Exactly, Jakey. Aradan, you said, that is what I mostly use Twitter for, and the main reason I'll be sad once it dies fully. For sure. The problem with wanting to befriend awesome people is that they're awesome people and so often very busy. Yeah, I mean, it's also true. Yeah, it's true. And even people who are, generally available, it can be hard to even just like find overlapping availability. All right, so let's look at this next one here. Affiliation and lifestyles. This is one of the ones that's also the most likely to change, especially throughout your 20s. So, why do I say that? Well, personality development is still really, really in flux until about your mid 20s, about the age of 26. Your brain is really still in adolescence until about your mid 20s. Your cerebral cortex doesn't finish its development until your mid 20s. We can actually see like cortical thickness increasing up until about the age of 26. It's delayed until later for people with things like ADHD. So it takes longer. And that change is why things like teenagers will constantly try on new identities, or even why teenagers might do something like fake an illness for a little while or do something really, really cringy. Like I knew kids who were teenagers who would like fake having depression and anxiety, literally because they wanted attention. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I really want to stress, like I'm not saying that because I'm judging those kids. That's actually developmentally appropriate and in many ways quite important for teenagers and adolescents in general to have the opportunity with trying on a bunch of new identities. A lot of the time it is a phase and they get over it. Trying to influence it from the outside is not likely to actually make them get over that phase more quickly, and in fact is more likely to cause them to double down on it. And it's also something where, it's normal for people to want to change a lot, and people are trying to figure it out. And you can't really figure out who you want to be just like in a vacuum. You can't just like sit there and like ponder like what kind of person do I want to be. A lot of the time it's really experiential. You kind of figure it out by doing it and then recognizing, how does this feel in my body? This is also one of the reasons why we talk so much about consent being about feelings and sensations in the body, not about rules and logic. Like I might logically think this thing should not bother me, but then when I experience, I can be like, no, this is totally not for me. So the next point is identity tends to be pretty in flux up until about your mid 20s. It's also one of the reasons why people who get married, generally speaking, before the age of 26 are the most likely to get divorced. That whole statistic of like 50% of marriages end in divorce is actually a little bit deceiving because the vast majority of those divorces are among people who got married before the age of 26. Now, they don't necessarily get divorced in their 20s as well. I did. I got married and divorced in less than a year, but for my first marriage, but they tend to do it in their 30s or sometimes even later, but it's because they're still developing as a person. After you kind of settle, personality and identity tends to be pretty stable across the rest of the lifetime until we get into sort of really aging and like elderly spaces. But even then, it still can be quite stable. Things that might change it are certain medical conditions, medications, traumatic brain injuries, trauma, like the death of a spouse or, surviving an accident or whatever. There are lots of things that can change a person's personality. But outside of that, generally speaking, it's pretty stable. So this is something, though, that when people are really still in flux, it can make friendships really unstable and sometimes unsustainable. But then also, if things are quite stable, but something happens that causes a person's personality to change, this can also lead to the decline of a lot of friendships.
And Jakey, you said it sucks when you are available too much and your friends aren't, for sure. Aradin, yeah, I had someone personally invite me to an event as there was one relatively near me, but it was both out of my price range. It was an event for charity, so I was okay with that. And I still wasn't comfortable going out to public venues, so I communicated that, but I was really touched that the person invited. Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I like that people invite me to things, but it's still a pandemic, and I'm, knock on wood, I still have not caught COVID. And that's because am still basically behaving like I did at the start of the pandemic. I'm not washing all my groceries like I did at the beginning, but I still am masking. I'm still trying to socially distance as much as possible, avoiding extended periods of close contact in poorly ventilated spaces. The couple of like small parties or events I've gone to were either entirely outdoors or we all tested as we arrived and like, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah. Um, yeah, Jakey, I would recommend bringing your vaccine card and check if Austria wants people to have a test within 72 hours or 48 hours. I don't think so, but they might. But definitely bring your vaccine card, and I would wear a mask on the plane. It does seem like masks work. This is one of those things where, like, at the beginning of the pandemic, there wasn't actually good evidence. Like, a lot of the research papers on masking actually showed that they may make the problem worse. And I did have concerns that continued, though now at this point it's kind of no longer a concern because most people don't mask anymore. But at the time, I was worried that masking would like make people feel safer than they actually were, and then they would take greater risks. And also, most people don't mask correctly. They wear things that don't fit right. They don't actually create a good seal. They wear them under their nose, whatever. And I was worried about that, and that did seem to be true. And I lived in Japan, which has a really strong masking culture, but people would do things like wear their mask when they're sick, but always take it down to talk, wear their masks so long that they would get like genuinely disgusting. And like the flu and the cold would still spread like wildfire through any school I was working at. And um yeah, it was so looked at the research and I was like, I don't think masking is likely to be that effective. And again, my biggest worry was, is this going to make people feel much safer than they actually are and then lead them to take unnecessary risks or risks they wouldn't have taken otherwise? However, the research does seem to show that it actually does work pretty well, even if you're not wearing things that correctly, you're not wearing something that fits. It doesn't, the more fitted and the more appropriate, like and proper your masking behavior is, the better protection it seems to give. Um, but even cloth masks don't give nothing, which is really good. Like, I can't stress how often with things like that, I am excited to be wrong. Like, it genuinely makes me feel relief when I'm wrong about certain types of things. And I don't think people believe me, but it's true. Aradin, you said I'm still following common sense, which is sadly not very common. Yeah. And Jakey, you said I have to bring a doctor's note for my medicine since Adderall is illegal. I also have to bring just enough. Yeah. I mean, Ritalin and stuff is available here. Adderall is not really available in Europe, unfortunately. That is definitely my preferred ADHD med. I think it works better for me, but when you go through customs, you don't have to actually say anything about it. You don't have to like declare it. But if they pull you aside and ask, it's important to have that information. Dustin, you said I took my kitty to the vet yesterday. I was the only one wearing a mask. Aradin, you're replying to Dustin. Yeah, one of the few times I've gone out was to renew my health card. And so I was one of the only people there wearing a mask. So I understand. Hope your kitty is doing well. Yeah, for sure. I hope your cat's doing well. So yeah, let's talk about this one a little bit more too. Affiliation and lifestyles. So typically we are drawn to our friends on the basis of affiliation. The two kindergartners with the same lunchbox, the classmates who love the same restaurant, the new colleagues in the same office are all simple examples of how commonalities have a path to partnership. I'd be lying if I said I haven't made friendships based off of my Barbie lunchbox, affinity for New York style pizza, and a passion for therapy. Nevertheless, people change over time. Friendships might grow in parallel, grow closer, or grow apart. The things that previously magnetized us to our friends may no longer exist, or at least our connection to them may have dissipated. Similarly, context may change as well. Although bonded between certain links, we may not recognize all of the factors that also help to fasten our friendships. Just because we both love pizza doesn't mean we still live the same lifestyle. I am still passionate about therapy, however, I am no longer in my graduate program. The context has shifted, and this change reverberated in my friendships. And there's these two quotes like, but we used to love playing sports together, and I wish I could still spend time with you, but it's important for me to spend time with my partner. And so this one is also quite common. You know, there's the personality development changes, but there's also the just life changes. There have been times where I was like really, really focused on like swing dance. Like that is my who I am. I'm gonna like really focus my personality around this. And there have been other times where I was like drag and Rocky Horror Picture Show. That's who I am as a person. And there have been, and these are also things I like for sure. But I'm not the kind of, how do I want to say this? I'm very novelty seeking, generally speaking. And I basically like have the inverse of an addictive personality where it's like actually really genuinely hard for me to like maintain extreme focus on any one thing. And so like an example of this would be like I'll have a video game that I'll get like really hyper focused on for a while, and that's like all I want to do is play that game. But then after a certain period of time, I'm like I never want to play it again. Like no interest. And it's not because anything happened, it's just my focus on that stopped. And so if I really focus my friendships around people who just have the same like single hobby as me, it can be hard. But one of the reasons why Kettlestick. I couldn't remember what his username was on this app. Kettlestick and I are really good friends, and we met through swing dance. But we also have a love of video games, board games, role playing games, and hiking. And we have like pretty much all of our hobbies are the same. And also his wife, she plays the guitar, he plays the piano. Charlie plays the banjo, I play the violin, so we could all like jam together and sing and hang out, and like that really helped sustain the friendship and helped it develop by having multiple different things that connected us and gave us different ways of interacting with each other. And it's okay to get into something because your friend is into it, but you don't want to force it. Like I've had friends that introduced me to new hobbies, and I got into swing dance because Charlie introduced it to me. When I first started doing it, I was very like, I think I was like I was going through a phase where I was like kind of a pretentious asshole for a little while. Like not intentionally, like I was, the goal was not to be pretentious. I just had some problems. I was just like not doing so hot in my life. And I was like working through those problems by like basically only listening to lots of opera and like reading philosophy texts. And I don't know. I don't know what else I was doing. I was just being a weirdo. But like when he was getting me into swing dance, I was just kind of like, ugh, I would rather be doing like super serious tango or something. This is too silly. And now I'm like, wait a second. I love silly. And you know, this is not to say that any of these things are bad and that like people who want to change frequently, there's anything wrong with them. You know, personality becoming generally speaking pretty stable around the age of 26 does not mean that a person's interests necessarily stay stable. One of the things that's often portrayed in media is like the crazy girlfriend who's often coded as like trying to seem like they're borderline as the person who like one week they want to be a photographer and the next week they want to be like a restaurateur and the next week they want to do this. And like, yes, technically the DSM says one of the symptoms of borderline is an instability in self-image and goals.
but that's not what that means. Like, this is one of the things that's difficult about the DSM is because if you read the descriptions of any one personality disorder, you'll see everybody's got symptoms of all of them. But first of all, you need to have a ton of the symptoms to qualify. It has to be consistent for at least 6 months. So usually, if you're still an adolescent, they want to see it consistent for a year or 2 years before diagnosing you with a personality disorder. And here's the real kicker: the impact needs to be present in pretty much every aspect of your life. If I've got the only thing that's unstable about my self-image is what I want my career to be, that does not mean that I have that symptom. It would have to be in, like, if that's one of the symptoms you're looking at, it would have to be in, like, basically every aspect of my life. Like, I don't know how I feel about my family and it changes constantly. This doesn't mean someone who doesn't know what they want to do with their life and has a fraught relationship with their family has borderline. It would have to be including then also, like, my romantic relationships are incredibly volatile and up and down all the time, and like that I, go from like loving the person and saying that they're the best person I've ever met one day, and then the next day I hate them and they're the worst person ever. That's something called splitting, and that would be like you base your impression off of the person, based off of the last interaction you had with them. And we have to be like instability in like every aspect of the person's life. Okay, setting that caveat aside, somebody who constantly is trying out new hobbies, new career paths, doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with them mentally. That could just be the way they like to live their life. They could just enjoy the constant sense of potential. They might enjoy trying new things. Their hobby could actually be trying new things. However, people sometimes get freaked out by that, and we kind of expect people to stay really locked into things. And when it comes to friendship, we also can feel like it's a big betrayal if something we shared with a friend no longer appeals to them anymore. But we have to really go into it remembering people change over time in sometimes surprising ways. And as much as possible, if you want that friendship to be really long term or romantic relationship, as much as possible, try to give yourself multiple ways of experiencing connection, camaraderie, intimacy, whatever it is. Okay, so backing up, Dustin, I'm glad your cat's doing well. He got a bunch of clicker and treat training when we got home, so he quickly forgave me. Nice, very nice. Rodden, you said clearly what you need to do is start doing swing dance and drag so you can combine them. Nice. So you were making a band then. Yes. And I don't think anyone intends to be a pretentious asshole. It just kind of happens. Yeah. It was kind of just what happened. And it was definitely because it was like just post my divorce. And like I was like, oh, what am I doing with myself and my life? And yeah, I was still under 26 as well. So, Aradin, it is what you do when you realize it is the difference. Some people double down and some people realize and change. Yes. And also, Aradin, you're absolutely right. The manic pixie dream girl thing. But there are other versions of the same like portrayal. But yes. So the thing I recommend here is, as much as possible, try your best to create multiple ways of connecting with people. If you have a single point of failure, that makes it a lot more precarious. But if you develop other types of connection and other ways of connecting, that really increases the oh yeah, that is true, Krellin. He actually did try to be pretentious, and it was weird. It was genuinely weird. I mean, like, I didn't really get it, but yeah. Yeah. Anyway. So continuing, having multiple ways of connecting with people really improves things. I really, really recommend it. Because that will often, I think, give you more, what's the word I'm thinking of?
just flexibility and sustainability. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a word, resilience. There we go. That's the word. It came to me. Okay. The next one, distance and connection. Let's move on to this one. A big way context can change is increasing distance. Could a friendship be as simple as out of sight, out of mind? Are long distance friendships automatically doomed? Of course not. Phone calls, text messages, and emails are just a few of the many ways to continue to foster a friendship from miles away. Regardless of distance, technological advances allow us to easily maintain a connection. Distance doesn't need to be the reason for your friendship failure if you opt to use social media to keep you close. However, it can be hard to adjust to a screen bond from a face-to-face friendship. So this is one of those things where, for me, I have a lot of friends that I still consider my friends, but who live on the other side of the world from me. I have a lot of people in Japan that I care about really deeply, one of whom I'm like low-key worried about because he hasn't replied to my text in a little while, and he's usually pretty responsive. So I'm gonna try to call him this week and just be like, yo, are you okay? But it's even though I haven't seen them in years in person, and sometimes I go in years in between. I have like a really good friend who I met when I lived in France. He moved to Denmark. I now live in Austria, and we're still really good friends. And whenever he comes this way, we visit, or whenever I go in his direction, we visit. I've got some people I'm still close with in France, and then I've got, of course, friends still in all over the US. And I keep in contact with them semi-regularly, and part of me knows that like it's unlikely I will ever live in the same city as those people ever again. Unless a bunch of things go wrong, or unless like Charlie somehow got, an assistant professorship at Harvard or something, like I'm not going back to Boston. I'm not going back to Massachusetts. I feel like I successfully escaped Massachusetts, and I don't necessarily want to go back. Even though most of my family is there and stuff, and I love them, I'm okay. Like, I kind of got everything I could get out of living there. And however, I still have friends there, and it's unlikely I'm ever going to live in the same area as them ever again. But that doesn't mean that the friendship is over. That just means that it's taken a different shape. But it can be hard to maintain that. For a lot of people, again, physical proximity is, generally speaking, based off of the actual research, the number one predicting factor in the longevity of a friendship and how likely it is to become deeper. And this is also why public transit is a big issue here, because if your friends live too far away for you to like hang out with regularly, and there's no public transit and everything is really distanced and you have to drive each of you like 45 minutes to go meet somewhere or whatever, that's unlikely to work very well. But here, any friend of mine in the city, probably going to take me 15 minutes, maybe at most it could take me 45 minutes. If they lived like literally in the outer suburbs, it could take me that long to get to them on public transit. But that means that I don't have to worry about driving. I don't have to worry about being tired. I can go drink if I want to with them. I can stay out super late. I can do other things while I'm on my way there and on my way back. It's so much better. Aradin, you had said, I would say more than tried, he succeeded. But yeah, there are always outliers. Yeah, I have friends that I've played TTRPGs with for years that I have never met and likely will never meet. And yeah, I would avoid the US right now if you can. Yeah, I mean, as much as possible, I would like to stay in Europe, so I'm hoping. But, this can be hard. Hi, Bark, woof, woof, you drinking? Yeah, I mean, I don't drink very often, but I would say like once every 4 months or so, maybe less frequent than that. But knowing that I have the option to drink and then not have to be concerned about, am I safe to drive home, and to drink or to go out and my friends are drinking and I don't have to worry about, are they safe to drive home because there's so much public transit, is amazing. Carolyn, you said, yeah, I have never met face to face my TTRPG group, but they're some of my closest relations. And I think this is a great example. These new technologies genuinely do facilitate the ability to have these different types of friendships and to help them become meaningful. I know for me, when I was playing both Final Fantasy XI and World of Warcraft, I was in like a Link Shell or a guild, you know, it depends on which game. And there are people I hung out with pretty often. And then getting the ability to do like TeamSpeak or any of these other like audio conference apps that people used for video games made a huge difference in how connected we all felt with each other. And now, where we could all be like on a Zoom call simultaneously while playing a game, if I still played MMOs, which I don't because they're not good for me, I tend to overplay them, and that is a hyper focus that tends to last longer than most of my others, so I tend to stay away from it. But if I were still into it, that would have been amazing. And I played, you know, for like 2 years a D&D game. We're on hiatus right now because the DM had a baby. Well, his wife had a baby, and they're just kind of really focused on their little kid. But and they live in England, and they were friends, or the DM was a friend Charlie and I made when we both lived in Japan. And like, this technology has really enabled this friendship to stay alive. Rodney said, I mean, I never would have gotten to know you beyond a person on a TTRPG show if you didn't start streaming. It's true. That is also true. And I'm really thankful for all of the people who knew me on Geek Space and who have followed over here, because it's really nice to hang out with you all. Okay, so the next thing here, expectations. According to research from Tel Aviv University and MIT, we have poor perception of assessing who our friends are. How can this be possible? I'm happy to own my bias here, as this leads me to what I infer may be one of the most common for ending friendships: mismatched expectations. Desires for caring, sharing, time, energy, closeness, and reciprocity may vary from friend to friend. Even if you are both giving your all, a mismatch can be impactful. Our hopes may fuel our expectations. Further, we may never make those intentions clear with our friends. In turn, our hopes may evolve into guilt, pressure, and entrapment, ultimately corroding the connection. So for me, I'm definitely the kind of person who really craves the sorts of friendships where like we hang out pretty regularly, but I also know like what's up with their life, where like every time we hang out, they don't have like a ton of new things to announce to me about their life. And very rarely have I had that kind of friendship where like we just see each other and interact regularly enough. I daydream about like people I'm friends with moving to live in the same building as me so we could like have dinners together more easily, and you know, just sort of being in this sort of ease of regular interaction. I like to have friendships where we still feel excited to hang out, but there becomes a casualness to it where like we hang out regularly enough that it doesn't feel like a big to do every time I see them, where it's just like, oh, we're just gonna like hang out and watch a movie together. We're just gonna chill. Like, I really like that. I've had that at certain points of time in my life with certain friends, like Kettlestick, for example, especially towards the end of my time in Seattle. It was a thing where we hung out quite regularly, and it was really, really lovely. And I miss that. But it's tough because not everybody likes that kind of closeness, and not everybody is good at sustaining that much contact. And then also, if I make a new friend, they might already be kind of full up on friends, and it might be hard for them to move into something else. There's a person that I've started to become friends with here. I think she's just like absolutely amazing. And like, if I weren't trying to not overwhelm and overshare, I would probably text her like all day, every day, because I just think she's super cool and like very, very like intellectually interesting and engaging for me. Has like really interesting insight into things. I like really like hanging out with her. And also she's like very cool and very busy. And so I'm trying to also not like push the development of this friendship too fast. One of the other things that can be tough about this disappointment and that, our hopes may fuel our expectations. There have been times in my life where I've met somebody and I liked them a lot at the first meeting as a friend, and I got too amped too quickly. And I didn't necessarily try to push through the stages of friendship too fast, but I let myself get too excited about the friendship too quickly, which then meant that when the relationship or the person didn't sort of live up to my daydreams, it was really difficult. Like this happened with the person Krellin and Aradin and I have been talking about. I was like really hyped when I met this person at first. And then like over time I started hanging out with them. And one, I realized that like never really actually had anything to say. They would just kind of like name drop constantly and like reference all these things that they knew, but like didn't want to ever actually have a conversation about anything. And also like would never ask other people how they were doing or like their thoughts or opinions on things really. And if someone shared, all they wanted to do was like talk about how they already knew that. And this was like something that I noticed over time. And it got really disappointing because the person was like almost really cool, but they were just like so sort of wrapped up in their shit. And they like lied to us all a bunch and did all these other shit things. But that was one of those friendships that was incredibly disappointing because I was like, oh, damn, this person seems really cool. And like they've invited me to join this thing. And I'm like being brought into this whole new friend circle. And I haven't really made that many friends here in Seattle yet. And this is great. And then I let myself get too excited too quickly. And I knew that on some level. And I didn't try to push through the layers of friendship too fast, but my mind got way ahead of me. And that made then also seeing red flags harder. It made sort of figuring out how do I actually want to navigate this friendship with this person harder, but it also made the inevitable disappointment harder. Aradin, you said they were very good at giving the appearance of being really cool. Absolutely. Yeah, they were. And, I think that they almost were. If they weren't doing some of the things that they were doing to like really manipulate people and cause all of this like inner turmoil, I would have been a pretty cool person. But these expectations were mismatched. Also, like he low key had the expectation that like me and every female friend of his was like kind of this like weird harem thing, even though I was like, I'm engaged and like these other people are also like lesbians and also like we're all clearly not interested in you in that way. Anyway, it was weird. Okay, here are some other quotes. But you were my best friend. I thought you understood me. Friendships can foster our happiness, and with their endings, our happiness may momentarily fade. Confusion, sadness, and frustration can ensue during this difficult time. I hope the causes discussed help to provide insight into common imbalances that may break our bonds. Please know that this list is not exhaustive by any means. These examples consider accountability from both friends, but it is not always the case that both are responsible. As noted earlier, parting ways can be mutually beneficial. Also, personal factors such as stressors, background, attachment, and mental health could distract a friend from reciprocating in the way they may wish to. So this is really related to like my ADHD and also the fact that I have depression and sometimes can get really sort of lost in that. And that I'm like running a nonprofit and I've got like a really intense job. All of these things together can mean, again, that I don't always show up for friendships the way I want to. So I try to create some structures in my life to help bridge that gap a little bit. And then I communicate as much as I can. Anyway, regardless, we have the opportunity to learn from our past partnerships. Rodney said, yeah, I have definitely done the whole overflood people that I was excited to befriend and overwhelm them. Yeah, absolutely. And like, if a person doesn't have a lot of context for you, think about it like with language learning. A good language class introduces grammar pretty slowly. It starts with a lot of vocabulary, things like set phrases, stuff that's used really immediately in everyday life. But if it comes in and immediately starts trying to tell you about like all these really complicated grammar rules, and you don't know anything about the language yet, really, it's going to be hard to remember those rules to begin with because you don't have any context for them. And it's also likely to make you exhausted and feel demoralized. This is a little bit of like pedagogy nerdiness, but a lot of textbooks for languages do it that way. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people think that they're terrible at learning languages, because most of the textbooks genuinely are awful. Like they just do not scaffold things well. They do not introduce things in any sort of like pedagogically sound way. They just kind of like dump grammar on top of the person and expect them to sort of figure it out. And it's really too bad. And the same is kind of true with like someone getting to know us. If someone doesn't know you at all, if it's the first time they've met you, anything you tell them about yourself is all that they're going to know about you. So you don't want to necessarily lead with like, here's this absolutely, like maybe kind of bizarre or scary or weird thing I've done. You maybe want to lead with the small talk, which people, I know it's like really, in vogue to be like, oh, I hate small talk. I never want to do it. But small talk is kind of how you show people that you're not dangerous or you're not likely to be stressful or scary for them to interact with as the first step. And it's a way that you build trust over time. And it's also a way you build context. If I get to know small things about you first, like you have a dog and you really like the Red Sox and you hate barbecues but you have to go to them because your family loves them, and like, you wish you liked the beach, but you always just get sand everywhere and it's coarse and sucks, and you like told your ex-girlfriend all about this one time and she totally didn't understand. Like some of that would be okay and some of that would be like, are you just quoting Star Wars to me? And maybe it would be fun, but you want to kind of scaffold it. I will be able to better contextualize intense things you tell me about yourself if I have context for them. Not just that you give me context in the story you're telling me, but you give me context for who you are as a person. And so this is one of those things where like oversharing, info dumping about yourself, oversharing, especially about stresses and traumas. If I don't have any other context for you, I'm likely to then just think of you as a stressful person to interact with. Because I had a stressful conversation with you the first time we talked. And if it becomes that way every time, that friendship's definitely not going anywhere. And it's one of the reasons why, like, even if you meet people in a support group or a group therapy group, it's not always that likely that you'll develop a lot of friendship because you really only know each other in the context of these stressful exchanges. All right. So this is, again, I'll share this article in the chat if you want to look at it some more. And I'm glad you both caught that I was talking about Star Wars. Arad, and I see that you say it is why these days I tend to be more cautious to the point that I might go too far the other way and not reach out as much as I should. Yeah, so this is the thing is like that's one of these skills that takes time to get good at is knowing like what's the balance between not overwhelming somebody and not basically low-key ghosting them unintentionally. And it's going to be different for each person you try to develop a friendship with. And also going to be one of those things that even if everything's going perfectly, it still might not work. So next time, I'm going to start to wrap it up here because it's been about 3 hours. Next time, I'm going to talk with you all about contempt and what we can talk about as an antidote to it, which is positive regard. And this is, I think, one of the most important things for creating long-term sustainable relationships of any type, which is, do we have a positive regard for each other as a baseline? So we'll talk about that more in depth in next week's episode. And yeah, I recommend starting to learn about it a little bit. And I also want to just recommend again this book. Oh, it's so bright. Friendship Processes. If you get the opportunity to read it, it's actually like a genuinely good guide for how to become friends with people. Krellin, you said, it occurs to me that the reason that those lines and interactions seem so weird and creepy is because Anakin was supposed to be weird and creepy. You know, that is true. And it's also one of those things like that's very hard to communicate well in a movie or TV show. I think it's a little easier to communicate it in a book that someone's supposed to be weird or creepy because you can kind of like write in how people are reacting to them. But it was too subtle in some ways. Aradini said, the fact that I have a lot of self-esteem issues and think I am always annoying people anytime I interact with them doesn't help. Yeah, I mean, for sure, that makes it harder. Yeah. All right. So we didn't actually play any Stardew Valley today. I'm sorry. I actually was planning on it, but I just got too hyped up to talk about friendship and the things that can make it fail. So thank you all for joining me today. I've really enjoyed hanging out with you all. Thank you to all the people who joined for the first time or the people who are watching and not joining chat. That's also really great. I recommend checking out our website for our upcoming workshops. We have the accountability series. You can still join for accountability pods if you missed the 101 class. The 102 class, I do generally recommend that you took the 101, but it's not necessarily directly required. It's just a recommendation. And we've got a really interesting class coming up on March 4th. This is relevant basically only to people living in the United States because of our defamation laws. But this is a class on if you want to talk about something going wrong with consent, what do you need to know about the legal risks, but what are also your legal rights and what kind of recourse do you have if someone's like threatening to bring a defamation suit? We also have discussion groups every month, and these are always free. And we have a lot of good things coming up. On the 21st, we have a fun class called Intro to Consensual Kink. So if you're new to kink or just kink curious, I actually do really recommend this class. And we have lots of other things coming up. So keep an eye there. We have a newsletter if you're interested in joining that. And of course, we are on all of social media and we have a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting free consent education and continue making this possible, consider supporting us on Patreon and you get access to a bunch of exclusive content. I'm going to publish an article probably this week on what to do if you aren't sure if your consent has been violated. Pretty happy with it, and it was really fun to write. So check that out. And otherwise, I will talk to you all on Sunday. Thank you all for joining me. Bye.